So we were discussing where by the last lecture session we were within the topic of relational schema design, and we were discussing relational data structure, right? So in this session, we are going to apply some of those concepts, that is, apply some of those rules of relational data structures to design our relational schema and see how to map an ERD or notations of an ERD into relational schema design, right? Right then. So at the top part of this figure, you will see notations from what we know in ERD, right? Entity relational entity relationship design, right? In our ERD model, this is what a regular entity looks like, right? Starting from customer, which is the name of the entity, and then the primary key customer ID, and then the regular attributes, customer name, address, so forth. So this is what just a regular entity looks like, right? And now to map that into our relational schema design, what do we need to do? First of all, we will have, once again, a sharp-edged rectangular thing here, and then inside that rectangular we'll have partitions to place each one of the attributes in each one of the cells inside. So see here, customer ID, customer name, customer address, customer postal code. All four attributes are separated by partitions, and that is the notation that we use. Within the outer rectangle, every single small rectangle, every single cell will contain each one of the attributes individually. And at the top left corner of the entire relation, as we call it, we will have the name of the relation. And now, relation, that is the term that we use in our relational schema design. Here it's entity, here customer is a relation. When we're talking about the ERD model, customer is an entity. In the relational schema design, customer is a relation. There is no entity in relational schema design. Don't use that term for relational schema design. In relational schema design, we've only got relations, right? Customer, this whole thing, this entire, let's say, row of cells, that the whole thing together is the customer relation made up of the customer ID, name, customer address, and customer postal code attributes. Okay, clear? Any questions so far?
No, ma'am.
Let's move on. Now this one is a little bit different. No? So Ariful Islam Shyam, are you there?
ম্যাম
Shyam, একটু বলো তো আমাদেরকে যে এই এন্টিটিটা, how is it different compared to this one? আগে যে এন্টিটিটা দেখি। What's different about this entity? Let's go one by one, Shyam. Then it'll be easy for us. যে first of all, এই যে দেখো এখানে যে customer লেখা, what is this?
বুঝতে পারিনি
এই যে এই জায়গায় at the right at the top এই যে customer যে লেখা, what is this? What is this whole thing? এই পুরো জিনিসটা কি? This is an entity, no?
ইয়েস ম্যাম এলটিটি
So what is customer then? Guys, do we know when the midterm exam is? By the way, did we all see the notification?
Yes, miss. On
Yes,
fifth.
Miss Friday.
দিস ফ্রাইডে
This Friday. How long is that? So not even 5 days. Right then. So for the ones of you who are still not clear on the topics of ERD, entity relationship design, data model, I would highly recommend going through the lectures. Highly recommend going through the lecture slides and getting back to
ERD-টা
me
আমি
if you
মনে
have
রাখতে
any.
থেকে শুরু করলাম না
Right, you don't have any time left for that, right? The thing with project is that projecte তোমরা অনেকে ঢিলাঢালা করে সাবমিশন দিয়েছো, একটা গ্রুপ দাও না এখনো সাবমিশন, but you could always go back and correct things. Midterm exam, do you have that option? Do you have the option to go back and correct whatever mistakes you've made in the
No,
written
miss.
exam or the Viva exam? No, you don't. So you will see that there are a couple of practice problems that have been posted on ERD. Start with the simple exercises, go on to the more complex one. And then once we're done with relational schema design today, you can go through the sample problems for relational schema design as well. And then you've got sample question papers from past semesters. And I would highly recommend giving them a try, all right? Giving them a crack after you've gone through the lecture recordings and the lecture slides of, let's say, ERD and relational schema design. Now, can anyone else please help me out here? How is this entity different from the last one?
Composite
It has a
attribute.
composite attribute.
Which one?
Composite
Composite
attribute.
attribute?
Address.
Address.
and address. But ma'am, you're not sharing the screen.
Ma'am, you are sharing different
Right.
screen.
Okay, right. Okay, thank you very much.
Customer
Okay,
address
right
is
here.
the composite attribute.
Customer address is the composite attributes. Yes, thank you very much. So here, once again, customer right at the top is the name of the entity. পুরা এন্টিটিটার একটা নাম থাকে না, এটা কোন এন্টিটি? কাস্টমার এন্টিটি। এই যে এটা এন্টিটিটা কার এন্টিটি? কাস্টমারের এন্টিটি। So a customer, the name of the entity we place always সবসময় দেখবা যে কোনো জায়গায় এন্টিটির নাম right at the top. The name of the entity is right at the top. Then you've got the primary key. How do you know, guys, that this is the primary key? Customer ID.
Bold and
Bold
underlined.
Bold
Bold and
plus
underlined.
underline.
That's right.
It
This is
also
bold and
identifier.
This is the identifier. That's right. This is the identifier, or this is the primary key. Bold and underline. Customer name. It's a regular attribute of customer name since no other special notation is used. Customer name is a regular attribute. However, customer address এর পাশে দেখতে পাচ্ছি parenthesis opens, parenthesis closes, and then inside we've got component parts. Customer address এর পাশে, if you see first bracket open holo, কিছু component parts এর নাম দেয়, customer street, customer city, customer state, and then first bracket close holo. We know that this is the notation for composite attribute. So customer address is a composite attribute with the component parts, customer street, customer city, customer state. And then finally, customer postal code is another regular attribute. Now, the more important question, how do we map this into our relational schema design? Once again, the name of the entity at the top left corner, and then we place each one of the attributes in the cells, right, of this row. So customer ID, primary key in the cell, and also remember, even in relational schema design, we must denote the primary key individually. Primary key আলাদাভাবে denote করে দিতে হবে, and for that we use a solid underline in relational schema design. Remember from last session that for identifying the primary key, we use a solid underline underneath the primary key. Customer ID is the primary key, hence we have a solid underline here. And then customer name and regular attribute.
প্রাইমারি কি সবসময় ফার্স্ট সেলেই থাকতে হবে?
That's what we usually do, but that's not a mandatory thing. That's what we usually do. First cell আমরা রেখে থাকি, but that's not something that's mandatory. It's easy. It's more readable if you keep it in the first cell or the first couple of cells, in case of multiple primaries. Okay. Then customer name is a regular attribute placed in a cell, and then customer address, remember, was a composite attribute with the component parts, customer street, city, customer state. What do we do with that? What we actually do is we break down customer address into its component parts and get rid of customer address. That whole relational schema design, customer address bolte kono attribute নেই. What we have done is we've broken down customer address into its component parts. Customer street becomes an attribute. Customer city becomes an attribute. Customer state becomes an attribute, right? That's what we do. Whenever we see a composite attribute in the ERD and we are mapping it into a relational schema design, we break down the composite attribute into its component parts, and the component parts become the attributes of the relation in the relational schema design. আর যেটা অরিজিনাল কম্পোজিট অ্যাট্রিবিউটের নামটা ছিল, we don't need that. Alright, we'll get rid of that. Just component part গুলোকে আমাদের রিলেশনাল স্কিমা ডিজাইনের যে রিলেশনটা আছে ওই রিলেশনটা অ্যাট্রিবিউট বানাবো। And then finally customer postal code a regular attribute, so place it there as usual. Clear the rules?
Yes, miss.
Yes,
And it makes sense, right? Think about it. Customer address এর তো আলাদা কোনো ভ্যালু নেই। কাস্টমার অ্যাড্রেসের ভ্যালু বলতে কি? কাস্টমার অ্যাড্রেসের ভ্যালু হচ্ছে কি কাস্টমার স্ট্রিটের একটা ভ্যালু, কাস্টমার সিটির একটা ভ্যালু, কাস্টমার স্টেটের একটা ভ্যালু। সো স্ট্রিট, সিটি, স্টেট এই তিনটা ভ্যালু মিলিয়ে হচ্ছে কি অ্যাড্রেসের ভ্যালু। অ্যাড্রেসের তো আলাদা কোনো ভ্যালু নেই। সো এই তিনটার ভ্যালু কম্বাইন করে আমরা অ্যাড্রেসের ভ্যালুতে বসাচ্ছি, তাই না? অ্যাড্রেসের তো আলাদা কোনো ভ্যালু। সো দ্যাটস ওয়াই we break it down to the component parts. So customer address এখানে রাখার কোনো necessity নেই because customer address এর নিজস্ব কোনো আলাদা ভ্যালু নেই. So break it down to the component parts and get rid of the original name of the composite attribute completely. That's it.
ম্যাম এটা যদি মাল্টি ভ্যালুড হতো তাহলে তো এই একই হতো না, মানে হচ্ছে
No,
ভেতরের
multi-valued হলে একই কে হবে। Multi-valued কি component part আছে নাকি? That is multi-valued is a multi-valued attribute made up of component parts. Component part হিসেবে চিন্তা করো। মানে এমন অ্যাড্রেসের ক্ষেত্রে চিন্তা করো, অ্যাড্রেসের ক্ষেত্রে স্ট্রিট, সিটি, স্টেট এই তিনটা মিলিয়ে অ্যাড্রেসের ভ্যালুটা হয়।
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ
একটা স্ট্রিট, একটা
যেমন
সিটি, একটা
একটা
স্টেট
অ্যাড্রেসের
ভ্যালু
নাম
তিনটা মিলিয়ে
দুইটা
হচ্ছে
সিটি হতে
অ্যাড্রেসের
পারে না।
ভ্যালু। Come again?
ম্যাম I was just saying that যেমন একটা অ্যাড্রেসের মধ্যে দুইটা সিটি হতে পারে না, একই
That's
সাথে
right.
ঢাকা এবং খুলনা হতে পারতেছে না।
Exactly. একটা ভ্যালুই কিন্তু স্ট্রিটের একটাই ভ্যালু, সিটির একটাই ভ্যালু, স্টেটের একটাই ভ্যালু, আর তিনটা কম্বাইন করে আমরা অ্যাড্রেস বানাচ্ছি। Multi-valued attribute, however, is a different thing. Multi-valued attribute, for example, here, do we have a multi-valued attribute, guys, in this entity?
Yes,
Yes, ma'am.
miss.
Skill.
Skills.
Skills.
That's right. So skill is a multi-valued attribute. And what does that mean? Skill এর কিন্তু কোনো component part নেই। তার মানে হচ্ছে কি একটা এমপ্লয়ির মাল্টিপল স্কিল থাকতে পারে for a single employee. Let's say if I'm an employee and then you've got my employee ID here 1 2 3 4 5, ঠিক আছে, and then employee name একটা single name থাকবে, employee address একটা single address value থাকবে, and also notice that address is not composite, so address একটা single value পুরো একটা লাইন হিসেবে থাকবে। কম্পোজিট না মানে কি অ্যাড্রেসের ভিতরে এখনো স্ট্রিট, সিটি, স্টেট থাকতে পারে, বাট ওগুলোকে আলাদা করা যাবে না। দ্যাট ইজ দ্য ডিফারেন্স। এখানে হচ্ছে কি স্ট্রিট, সিটি, স্টেট আলাদা করে দেয়া আছে, যে স্ট্রিট আলাদা, সিটি আলাদা, স্টেট আলাদা, কম্পোনেন্ট পার্ট হিসেবে। এখানে অ্যাড্রেস হচ্ছে কি ধরে নাও একটা সিঙ্গেল লাইন, আর পুরোটাকে একসাথে একটা ভ্যালু হিসেবে ট্রিট করা হচ্ছে।
ওটাকে ডিভাইড করে ডিফারেন্ট কম্পোনেন্টে ভাগ করা হয়নি।
ভাগ করা হয়নি, এক্স্যাক্টলি, এন্ড ভাগ করা হবেও না, বিকজ ওই নোটেশনটা তো দেয়া হয়নি। সো আমাকে যে ডেটা ডিজাইনটা করে দিয়েছে, if I am the backend developer, let's say আমি ডেটাবেসটা ডিজাইন করব, তখন আমি অ্যাড্রেসটা দেখে বুঝবো যে এখানে কোনো কম্পোনেন্ট পার্টে, we don't need to break it down to component parts basically. That's what I do. And that's why you see here, what do you see? Employee address, that attribute directly comes into the relation as it is. আগে কেসে দেখো, what did we do? Customer address, we've broken it down into the component parts. But এখানে directly employee address ছিল, এখানে employee address directly চলে আসছে, because the value inside we're not going to break it down because it's not modeled as a composite attribute. So আমাকে এটা বলা হয় যেটা we have to break it down. So since it's not modeled as a composite attribute, we'll put it as it is. Employee address এখানের মধ্যে যেটা আছে, we'll treat it as a regular attribute and we'll put it in the relational in the employee relation as it is. Now skill, however, is a different story, because skill is a multi-valued attribute. What does that mean? একটা single employee multiple skill থাকতে পারে। So একটা single employee ID value, single employee name, single employee address, skill এক অথবা একের বেশিও হতে পারে, ঠিক আছে, মাল্টিপল স্কিল থাকতে পারে। Let's say here you put in English speaking skills, Bengali speaking skills, and then let's say they can use Python and Java at the same time, and so on. Multiple skills, you list them one by one. Don't get this confused with the composite attribute. Each one of these skills are not component parts of the skill attribute. তারা কিন্তু পার্ট না। দেখো স্ট্রিট, সিটি, স্টেট এগুলো কম্পোনেন্ট, তাই না? বাট স্কিল, এক একটা স্কিল যে তুমি লিস্ট করবা, They're not components to anything. They're not parts of anything. You just have multiple values. কয়েকটা value আছে ওখানে। Multiple values for a single instance of the entity. একটা single employee instance এর multiple skill থাকতে পারে, right? Now, the more important question once again, how do we map it into the relational schema? Now, you will remember from the rules of relational data structure that there cannot be more than one value at the intersection of a column and a cell in the tables. Column and a row in the tables. That is, every single cell. একটা টেবিলের প্রত্যেকটা সেলে যে ভ্যালুগুলো থাকবে ভ্যালুগুলো অ্যাটমিক হতে হবে, completely atomic. You cannot have multiple values. The values have to be atomic. So, একটা single employee instance, ঠিক আছে, ওই employee instance এর রোটা চিন্তা করো। রোতে first seller value কি? The employee ID 1 2 3 4 5. Employee name something, all right, lorem ipsum. Employee address something, again lorem ipsum. And then skill, under the skill column under যে সেলটা আছে, how many values can you put there? Only one value. It has to be single valued cell. If an employee instance has multiple skills, let's say employee 1 2 3 4 5 j id টা employee, that employee has 4 skills. এই চারটা স্কিল কে আমি একটা সিঙ্গেল সেলে রাখতে পারবো? No, I cannot do that. That goes against the rules of relational data structure. In order to keep the cells atomic, what do we have to do? You have to take skill outside of the employee relation. Employee relation এর মধ্যে skill রাখতে পারবো, and we'll put it into a new relation. Place it inside a new relation, where for every single skill we'll have an individual row. Let's say, for example, employee ID 1 2 3 4 5 has 4 different skills. So employee skill table A, there will be 4 different rows for each one of those 4 skills. So what will the table look like? Employee table A, employee ID 1 2 3 4 5. এই এমপ্লয়িটার জন্য একটা সিঙ্গেল রো থাকবে, একটা সিঙ্গেল রো এমপ্লয়িকে রিপ্রেজেন্ট করবে। এমপ্লয়ি স্কিলে এসে, however, we will have 4 different rows for this employee because this employee had 4 skills, let's say, all right? যে চারটা স্কিল ছিল, একটা স্কিল হচ্ছে কি ইংলিশ, একটা বেঙ্গলি, একটা জাভা, একটা পাইথন, ঠিক আছে? সো চারটা স্কিল রাখলাম, and then employee ID তে for all those 4 rows under employee ID we'll have 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 5. That is one row, একটা single row will look like প্রথম সেলটাতে থাকবে ID 1 2 3 4 5, second cell এ থাকবে let's say English, then another row, আরেকটা রোতে employee ID value 1 2 3 4 5, skill let's say Bengali, and then আরেকটা রোতে employee ID 1 2 3 4 5, skill let's say Python, আরেকটা রোতে employee ID 1 2 3 4 5, skill let's say Java, ঠিক আছে? এইভাবে করে। Then let's say we have another employee ID 2 3 4, ঠিক আছে? And that person has 2 skills, okay? That person has একটা skill হচ্ছে কি let's say Bengali, একটা skill হচ্ছে কি Flutter. So employee ID will be 2 3 4, and then skill এর value হবে কি Bengali. That will be one row. আরেকটা রোতে কি থাকবে? আরেকটা ডিফারেন্ট রোতে by the way, employee ID 2 3 4 and skill will be Flutter. এভাবে করে আলাদা থাকবে। Now, since an employee can have multiple skills, in the employee skill table, will employee ID alone be unique?
No, ma'am.
No, it won't be. Think about it already. Employee ID 1 2 3 4 5 এর জন্য how many times was the ID repeated? 4 times. চারটা স্কিল আছে, 4 times ID was repeated. That's right. যতগুলো স্কিল আছে ততবার আইডিটা রিপিটেড হবে। যতগুলো স্কিল আছে ততগুলো রো, রিমেম্বার, প্রত্যেকটা স্কিলের জন্য আলাদা আলাদা রো, তো ততবার আইডিটা রিপিটেড হবে। সো এমপ্লয়ি আইডি ইজ নট ইউনিক এনিমোর ইন এমপ্লয়ি স্কিল। নাও will skill be unique? The skill value, do you think the skill value will be unique?
Yes,
No,
ma'am.
Yes,
Yes,
how?
ma'am.
No, how?
Different ID can have same skill.
Same skill.
Yes.
Okay, And if any of you guys said unique, why do you think it's going to be unique? Let's hear that as well. Why do you think skill will be unique? Okay, never mind. So no, skill will not be unique either. So remember, employee ID 12345 had the skill Bengali. Employee ID 234 also had the skill Bengali, right? So that is multiple different employees can possess the same skill. এটা তো হতেই পারে।
Yes, ma'am.
4 জন different employee, all of them can code in, let's say, Python. এটা হতেই পারে। So skill will not be unique either. If multiple different employees can have the same skill, so একটা skill multiple rowতে repeated হবে for all those different employees. So skill will not be unique either. However, relational data structure, we know that every single relation must have a primary key. প্রত্যেকটা রিলেশনের primary key থাকতেই হবে।
So we combine the ID and the
So we
skill.
combine ID and skill, that's right. Because while employee ID alone will not be unique, while skill alone will not be unique, if we combine the two together, it will be unique. Employee ID 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then Bengali, that row will only be once. ওই রোটা তো রিপিট করার কোনো রিজন নেই। We've already represented the fact that this employee has the Bengali speaking skill. So employee ID 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and skill Bangla, that row will be unique. So the combination of employee ID and skill will be unique. So our primary key in this case will be the combination. Rule of thumb যদি চিন্তা করো, rule of thumb হচ্ছে গিয়ে যখনই মাল্টি ভ্যালুড অ্যাট্রিবিউট দেখবো সাথে সাথে আমার বুঝে নিতে হবে একটা নতুন রিলেশন বানাতে হবে। Need to make a new relation. And from the original relation, the employee relation, we take skill out of it. A employee entity জন্য যে employee relationটা বানালাম, we will not place skill inside that relation at all. We will make a new relation for skill. ওখানের মধ্যে আমি স্কিল রাখবো and আমার অরিজিনাল যে এন্টিটিটা ছিল এন্টিটির প্রাইমারি কিও এই নতুন রিলেশনে নিয়ে আসবো। ঠিক আছে? And then the primary key of this new relation will be the combination of employee ID and skill. That is the primary key of the original entity and the multi-valued attribute itself. Okay? And the name of the relation. In name term, do we need to spend too much time? No. Simply name of the entity, name of the multi-valued attribute. দোনোটাকে combine করে I will make up the name of the relation. Employee skill. Simple জিনিস শেষ। এটার পিছনে সময় spend করার কোনো reason নেই। Employee skill. As simple as that. And finally, what does this arrow represent, guys?
Foreign key.
Which one is the foreign key? For who?
Employee
Employee
skiller employee ID হচ্ছে foreign key.
That's right. Employee ID here is a foreign key for the employee skill relation. However, foreign key notation, if you recall, was a dashed underline. Do we see the dashed underline here? No. Why is that?
Both primary key and
That's
foreign key
right.
at the same time.
Employee ID is a part of the primary key as well. When a certain attribute is a foreign key as well as the primary key or a part of the primary key, then the primary key notation takes precedence. So dash underline in জায়গায় ওই জন্য আমরা solid underline use করেছি because employee ID is a part of the primary key to denote that. এখন employee ID তো foreign key, how do we denote that? This arrow tells us about the referential integrity. The arrow tells us that this employee ID is a foreign key for the employee skill relation and the source of its value is from the employee ID primary key of the employee relation. So it's pointing towards the origin. It's pointing towards the origin. The arrowhead is at the origin. That's what we do. In case of a composite attribute, simply break it down to the component parts. In case of a multi-valued attribute, create a new relation and put the multi-valued attribute in the new relation. Now, here, what type of relationship is the claims relationship? And what is the difference between the employee and the dependent entities?
Strong entity or weak entity?
That's right. Employee is a strong entity. Dependent, on the other hand, is
Weak
a
entity.
weak entity. Okay. So we know that because of the notations that we've learned from ERD, strong entity is surrounded by a single line of border. Dependent entity, because it's a weak entity. Dependent, because it's a weak entity, is surrounded by double S border, right? Double lines. Now, the relationship in the middle, see, we have a specific notation for that as well. Usually, relationship line ki dekhte does it look like this? Relationship lines.
No, ma'am.
No.
It's a single line, right?
single
Usually
line.
it's a single line. Why do we have a double line here? Because this is the dependent relationship. This is the identifying relationship of the dependent entity. This is the dependent relationship. That is a weak entity. Weak entity সাথে যে রিলেশনশিপটার দেখবো যে ডাবল লাইন আছে ওই রিলেশনশিপের লাইনটা ফলো করে আমরা দেখব এই উইক এন্টিটিটা কোন স্ট্রং এন্টিটির উপর ডিপেন্ড করে। So this is the weak relationship. Claims is the weak relationship. So once again, when we have a weak entity, to see which strong entity it depends on, একটা weak entity তো একটা strong entity উপরই ডিপেন্ড করে, but কোন strong entity উপর ডিপেন্ড করে, to see that we will follow the weak relationship. When you design or when you draw your ERD as well, ERD question যখন দেয়া থাকবে ওখানেও you will have to do the same thing. If you draw a weak entity, ওই weak entity-টা যে strong entity উপর dependent তার সাথে যে রিলেশনশিপের লাইনটা থাকবে, that line will be a double line, as you can see here, to identify the weak relationship, to show us which strong entity is the one on which the weak entity depends. A weak entity that dependent, the weak entity depends on the employee strong entity. How do we know that? Because the weak relationship represented by the double line here connects to the employee entity. Now, once again, back to our topic today for this lecture. How do we map it into the relational schema design? So first of all, on this side, we have a regular entity. Employee is a regular entity. So employee ক্ষেত্রে কি করব? আমরা একটা regular entity যেভাবে একটা relation-এ map করেছি, we'll do the same thing here. As simple as that. Top left corner হচ্ছে we will place the name of the relation, which is employee, name of the entity থেকে name of the relation, we get that, and then each of the attributes placed in each of the cells. Employee ID, employee name, or each of the columns, employee ID, employee name. Now, dependent is a weak entity. So dependent ক্ষেত্রে কি করব? First of all, dependent name. What type of attribute is this?
Composite attribute.
It's a composite attribute. Is that all?
Partial identifier.
Partial identifier.
Partial identifier.
That's right. It's a composite attribute, which is also a partial identifier. Right? So first of all, partial identifier part আমরা একটু পরে দেখি। Composite attribute হয়ে থাকলে আমরা কি করব? This is a
সেপারেট করে দিব।
Separate করব।
That is, we will have attributes for first name, middle name, last name. First name, middle initial. First name, middle initial, last name. এই তিনটা attribute আমাদের থাকবে, as you can see. But we won't have any attribute in the dependent relation. In the dependent relation, we won't have any attribute named dependent name. Dependent name নামের কোনো attribute আমাদের থাকবে না. We will break it down to first name, middle initial, and last name, as you can see here. First name, middle initial, last name. And then also date of birth and gender. These two are the regular attributes. We'll place them as regular attributes in the dependent relation as well. And finally, we will also bring in the primary key of the strong entity on which this weak entity depends. A weak entity, dependent নামের weak entity-টা যে strong entity-র উপর depend করে তার primary key, employee ID is the primary key, right? We'll bring that primary key into this relation. Okay. Now,
Ma'am,
yeah.
can we put employee ID in the front, like switch it with first name?
Yeah, yes, of course you can do that, for sure. That still doesn't affect the variability, and that's still in keeping with the rules, so that's fine. Yeah. Now, for the primary key of the dependent relation, see here, dependent name is the partial identifier.
ম্যাম আমাদের আমার একটা কোশ্চেন ছিল, সেটা হচ্ছে গিয়া ম্যাম ওই যে আইডেন্টিফায়ার যে ইয়াটা ছিল ওটা তো আমরা লিখি, কিন্তু পার্শিয়াল যে আইডেন্টিফায়ার আছে ওটা তো লিখলাম না, ওটা কি লিখবো না? মানে ডিপেন্ডেন্ট যে নেমটা এটা তো পার্শিয়াল, তো এটা তো লিখি, এটা লিখবো না
কোথায় লিখবো?
মানে
Composite.
এটা কম্পোজিট,
We
এটাকেই
have
তো
written
ভেঙে
that.
ভেঙে ভেঙে
আচ্ছা
লিখি।
আচ্ছা 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 আচ্ছা, হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ বুঝছি বুঝছি আচ্ছা আচ্ছা,
You mean in the relation?
হ্যাঁ 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 হচ্ছে বুঝছি, হ্যাঁ
That's all right. Okay. So, once again, dependent is a relation and it must have a primary key. So, primary key কিভাবে বানাবো? Dependent name, remember, is a partial identifier. Partial identifier মানে কি? That is, it will be a part of the primary key, but dependent name alone is not enough to be the primary key on its own. Dependent name on its own will not suffice to be the primary key. However, it will be a part of the primary key. Dependent name will be a part of the primary key. That's why the partial identifier, but একাশে primary key হতে পারবে। So primary key কিভাবে বানাবো? We will combine the components of this composite attribute, which is a partial identifier. Dependent name is a composite attribute and a partial identifier. So since it's a composite attribute, we broke it down into component parts, and since it's a partial identifier, যেহেতু dependent name একটা partial identifier, we make the component parts a part of the primary key. Component part যেগুলো আছে, first name, middle initial, last name, এই তিনটাকে আমরা primary key একটা part বানাবো. Why? Because dependent name was a partial identifier. That's why the components become a part of the primary key. However, they alone, first name, middle initial, last name, on their own cannot be the primary key since partial. So we will bring employee ID into the loop as well. So employee ID, when we combine with the employee ID, then we have a unique combination. Notice here the nature of the relationship. The weak entity dependent. Look at this relationship. On the side of the employee, we don't have any closed hood. What does that mean? Every single dependent instance is related with a single employee instance. At the single employee instance, multiple dependent instances are related. That is, a single employee instance may have multiple dependent instances dependent on them. At a single employee instance, multiple dependent instances. Let's say, for example, an employee has 2 kids and a parent, and all 3 of them are dependent on that employee. So 3 জন dependent. But for each one of those 3 dependents, they are related with a single employee. Each one of the kids related with a single employee. The parents related with a single employee. So at a single dependent instance, at a single employee instance এর সাথেই related থাকবে. But at a single employee instance এর multiple dependent থাকতে পারে. But the important thing is, একটা single dependent instance এ কিন্তু একটাই employee সাথে relationship আছে. As you can see here, on the left hand side there is no closed loop. So একটা single dependent এর সাথে একটা single employee relationship আছে. So for a single dependent instance, there will be a single employee ID. So what we can say basically is that
just for the sake of it, in this design, let's say both the employee and the spouse both are in the same company, but their kids cannot be dependent on both of them, a single kid. And in this design,
based on this relationship,
yeah.
Well, yes and no. Because, yeah, in that case, what you would have to do is have both the kids, they could be dependent on both of the employees, but you would have to have them in separate instances, the same kid, right? Let's say, for example, the spouse and the yeah, so the parents, they share a single kid, all right? So that kid, your question is whether we can establish a relationship for that kid with both of them. Yes, we can, but in different
Yeah.
instances. We'd have to create 2 instances for the same kid in that case. Yes, that would be a problem. Yeah, that's how you would have to do it.
Okay.
But for the single instance, you cannot have a single instance related with multiple employees because of the nature of this relationship. But if this were many to many, in that case, that would have been fine. যদি এটা many to many হয়ে থাকতো, একটা single instance-এর সাথে আমি multiple employee ID relate করতে পারি, relationship establish করতে পারি. But because of the cardinality of this relationship, on this side, on the left-hand side, since there is no closed food, and we can assume that it represents a one-to-many relationship, not many-to-many, one-to-many. That's why, for your example, you would have to create 2 separate instances for the same kid, or have the kid related, or have the kid in a relationship with a single one of the employees.
Got it, ma'am.
All right. Now, to map it into the relation, however, relation map করতে গেলে একটু খেয়াল করো, এটা যদি many to many হতো, even in that case, we wouldn't have an issue. Many to many হলেও, it wouldn't be an issue. Because think about it. In the dependent table, right, we could have multiple rows where the same employee ID is repeated. Because actual employee multiple dependent থাকতে পারে। তার মানে কি? If an employee has, let's say, 3 dependents, dependent table এ 3টা রোতে ওই employee ID repeated হবে। একজন এমপ্লয়ের উপরে যদি 3 জন dependent depend করে, all right? In that case, in the dependent table, we would have the employee ID repeated thrice, 3টা রোতে থাকবে। 3টা ডিপেন্ডেন্টের আলাদা আলাদা রোতে প্রত্যেকবার একই এমপ্লয়ি আইডি রিপিটেড হবে, right? And it's also possible that 2 different dependents have the same name, same first name, same middle initial, last name. হতেই পারে। That's also possible, no? However, the combination, is there any way for the combination to be repeated? Not likely, right? If you combine the employee ID value with the first name, middle initial, last name, all of them together, then that is surely going to be unique. What the issue here is that the dependent name is a partial identifier. Why is that a partial identifier? Because 2 different people can easily have the same names, same name. That's why dependent name is a partial identifier. That is, পুরা নামটা, the combination first name, middle initial, last name repeated হতেই পারে because 2 different people may have the same. And employee ID as well is not going to be unique for the dependent table. Why? Because একজন employee যদি multiple dependent থাকে, যতগুলো dependent আছে ততগুলো রোতে employee ID repeated হবে. However, the combination will be unique. একজন employee, one of the dependents, the combination will not be repeated in any way. Right? So that's why when we have a weak entity, what is the rule of thumb when we have a weak entity? In case of a weak entity, we create a relation for that weak entity, the dependent relation as you can see here, and the partial identifier combined with the primary key of the strong entity on which this weak entity depends. যে strong entity উপরে এই weak entity depend করে, ওই strong entity primary key নিয়ে এসে আর এই weak entity partial identifier কে নিয়ে এসে দুটোটাকে combine করে we make up the primary key of the new relation, the dependent relation. Dependent relationটার primary key বানাবো by combining the partial identifier of the weak entity and the primary key of the strong entity together. Right? And the regular entities will be placed as it is. And here, we don't have dependent name here at all because the partial identifier in this weak entity was a composite attribute. That's why. If it wasn't a composite attribute, in that case, you'd have a dependent name. And finally, since employee ID is a part of the primary key, employee ID, since it has to be a part of the primary key because dependent was a weak entity, that's why it is accompanied with a solid underline underneath. However, remember that employee ID is also a foreign key for the dependent relation. Why is employee ID a foreign key for the dependent relation, guys?
employee entity primary key.
That's right. Originally employee ID কোত্থেকে আসছে? Employee relation থেকে আসছে। Employee relation থেকে employee ID টা originally আসছে। That's why employee ID is actually a foreign key for the dependent relation, which is referencing the employee ID primary key of the employee relation, as we can see from this arrow. Arrowhead pointing towards the origin. The employee ID is a foreign key reference referencing the employee ID primary key of the employee relation. That's how we map a weak entity into a relational schema design. The weak entity dependent is now the dependent relation with its own primary. Now, let's see how from here on onwards, let's see how we can map relationships into our relational schema design. Remember, we don't have any relationships in relational schema design. Relational schema te kono relationship bolte kono kichu nei. Entity relationship এই জিনিসগুলো আর relational schema design exist করে। Entity তো আমরা রিলেশনে ম্যাপ করব, এটা আমরা জানলাম। রিলেশনশিপ গুলো কি করব? রিলেশনশিপ গুলোর জন্য remember we have the foreign key primary key references mainly for these relationships. So here we've got customer, order, both of these regular entities. So first of all, we will map them as the regular entities as it is. Customer with customer ID, primary key, name, address, postal code, regular attributes. Order with order ID and order date. Primary key, regular attribute, fine. Now, you have the relationship to have. And what is the degree and cardinality of this relationship?
Binary or
Mandatory one and
one to
optional
many.
many.
That's right. It's a binary relationship, that's the degree. And the cardinality is mandatory one to optional many. That's right. That is, what does that mean? A customer may submit multiple orders. However, a single order instance is submitted by exactly one customer. That is like a single order instance submitted by exactly one customer. And a customer may submit multiple orders. তাহলে, because of this relationship, we have to maintain a reference. Remember, we use foreign key primary key references to represent these relationships. The fact that an order is placed by a certain customer, এই ইনফরমেশনটা তো somehow আমার রিপ্রেজেন্ট করতে হবে, তাই না? The fact that a certain order, যে প্রত্যেকটা অর্ডার যে একটা কাস্টমার প্লেস করেছে, we have to maintain that information or represent that information somehow. So how do we do that? Either আমরা কাস্টমার রিলেশন একটা ফরেন কি রেখে দিতে পারি অর্ডার আইডি, or অর্ডার রিলেশন একটা ফরেন কি রেখে দিতে পারি কাস্টমার আইডি. Can we place a foreign key for order ID in the customer relation? Will that work? No, it won't. Why? Customer relation e order ID নামের কোনো foreign key নেই। কেন নেই? Because it won't work. And why won't it work? Because a single customer may place multiple order. এই customer relation এ তুমি যদি order ID নামে একটা foreign key আনো, let's say for the same customer, the single customer. Let's say for example, Shaba is a customer for চালডা, ঠিক আছে? তো তার হচ্ছে কি কাস্টমার আইডি, কাস্টমার নেম, কাস্টমার অ্যাড্রেস, সিঙ্গেল ভ্যালু, ফাইন। কাস্টমার পোস্টাল কোড সিঙ্গেল ভ্যালু। অর্ডার আইডিতে এসে দেখা গেল সাবা হচ্ছে গিয়ে সো ফার সে চাল ডালে হচ্ছে কি 10টা অর্ডার প্লেস করেছে। সো which order ID will you place there? ওই 10টা অর্ডারের মধ্যে কোন অর্ডার আইডিটা রাখবা? Can you keep all the 10 order IDs in the single cell? Can we do that?
No, ma'am.
No. That is against the rules of relational data structure and the integrity rule, right? যে একটা single cell আমরা atomic value রাখি। Can we have 10 separate rows for these 10 orders in the customer relation? No. Why?
আর রো গুলো আর ইউনিক থাকছে।
That's right. The rows won't remain unique. So that tells you that you cannot place a reference in the relation which is going to be related with multiple instances of the other entity. The customer, as you can see, may place multiple orders. So at a single customer instance এর জন্য multiple different order ID থাকতে পারে. So order ID can be customer এর রাখবো না. However, on the other hand, a single order instance is placed by exactly one customer. একটা single order instance is submitted by exactly one customer. একটা order একটা single customer place করে থাকে. Now, if you place a reference of customer ID in the order relation, that will work. Order relation এর মধ্যে customer ID একটা reference যদি রাখি, that will work. Why is that? Because একটা single order instance এর কথা চিন্তা করো. Order ID 1001. Order date something, whatever. Customer ID কিন্তু একটা value থাকবে. একটা single value থাকবে। So সাবার 10টা অর্ডার যে আছে, সাবার যে 10টা ডিফারেন্ট অর্ডার যে প্লেস করেছে জাল ডালে, ওই 10টা অর্ডারের জন্য অর্ডার টেবলে 10টা ডিফারেন্ট 10 different rows will be there for those 10 orders that Shaba, let's say, placed. 10 different rows will be there in the order table, and all those 10 rows will be unique by order ID. Order ID value দিয়ে all those 10 rows will be unique. আর প্রত্যেকটা রোতে in every single one of those individual rows customer ID এর মধ্যে ভ্যালু থাকবে সাবার, but that's all right because this time we are placing a single value. প্রত্যেকটা রোতে একটাই ভ্যালু customer ID, because a single order is placed by a single customer. So customer ID value এখানে একটা single value থাকে always, because exactly one. And here, why do we have a dashed underline?
Because
What
it's
does
a
the dashed
foreign
underline
key.
represent? Foreign key, that's right. Notice that customer ID here that we've placed in the order relation is not a part of the primary key. Customer ID is not the primary key, it's not a part of the primary key. So you must use the dashed underline underneath. A dashed underline যেটা use করতেই হবে in this case to represent the fact that customer ID is a foreign key. So far use করিনি because the foreign keys were a part of the primary keys as well. Part of the primary key. But in this case, that's not the situation. So we must use the dash underline to represent that customer ID is foreign key. Also, at the same time, we must use the arrow as well. Arrow টাও থাকতেই হবে to show who is it referencing. সে foreign key বুঝলাম dash underline দিয়ে, but কাকে reference করছে? It's referencing the customer ID primary key of the customer relation. That is the source of the origin. এই জিনিসটা দেখানোর জন্য we have the arrow. So rule of thumb. One to many relationship এ কি করব? In ERD তে one to many relationship যদি থাকে, many side এ যে এন্টিটিটা আছে, many side এর entity relation এর মধ্যে foreign keyটা রাখবো, not on the one side. If it's a one to many relationship, one to many relationship থাকলে many side এ যে এন্টিটিটা আছে, many side এ কোন এন্টিটি আছে এখানে order. So order এর জন্য যে রিলেশনটা বানাবো ওখানের মধ্যে আমরা foreign keyটা প্লেস করব. Place it in the order relation. Foreign key for the relation on the other side. Relation representing the entity on the other side. Foreign key for that.
ম্যাম একটা কোশ্চেন
Go ahead.
ম্যাম আগের স্লাইডে এমপ্লয় আইডিটা প্রাইমারি কি ছিল
That's right.
এর জন্য কি আমরা বোল্ড করেছিলাম বোল্ড
That's right.
আন্ডারলাইন বাট ফরেন কি ছিল কিন্তু আমরা ড্যাশ আন্ডারলাইন করি না বিকজ ওটা প্রাইমারি কি এমপ্লয় আইডিটা
এই জায়গায়. That's right.
Yes,
Yeah,
ma'am.
this is not a dash underline because it's a part, it has to be a part of the primary key. That's right. So when an attribute is both a foreign key and the primary key or a part of the primary key, in that case, the solid underline, that's the one we use because the primary key notation takes precedence. Solid underline দিয়ে আমরা বুঝাতে চাচ্ছি যে employee ID is a part of the primary key. এটা তো বুঝাতে হবে তাই না? ওই জন্য আমরা solid underline use করি। আর যে অ্যারোটা রেখে দিয়েছি এই অ্যারোটা আমাকে বলছে যে employee ID is also a foreign key for the dependent relation referencing the employee ID primary key of the employee relation. Okay. Here, however, customer ID is not the primary key or not a part of the primary key. That's why we must use the dash underline. তার নিচে তো solid underline দেওয়ার কোনো necessity নেই বা কোনো reason নেই, solid underline দেওয়ার কোনো reason নেই. So dash underline use করতে হবে in this case. Okay. All right. Moving on to a many-to-many relationship. An employee may complete multiple courses. A course may be completed by multiple employees. And then what is this date completed?
Associative attribute.
Associative attribute, yes, one way to call it. or a relational attribute. More importantly, relational attribute. That's the correct terminology that is most commonly used. The date completed is a relational attribute which belongs to who? Employee or course? Which one?
Employee.
If it's an attribute, date completed, which entity does it belong to? Employee or course?
Completes.
Course.
Employee, sorry.
If it belongs to employee, তাহলে employee নিচে কেন date completed রাখলাম না? If date completed belongs to employee, why isn't it listed with the rest of the attributes of employee?
Actually, ma'am, it belongs to both. I guess.
That's not actually completely correct either. It doesn't.
Course area যদি আমরা চিন্তা করি,
Yes, it belongs to the relationship. So
That's right.
it doesn't
It belongs
really
to the
belong to any
relationship.
single one of them.
That's right. It belongs to the relationship. Like Shaba suggested, date completed belongs to the completes relationship. Right? And yes, in a sense, it belongs to both entities, but not so that we can place them in any of one of these. ঠিক আছে, সো ওই কথাটা অ্যাকচুয়ালি আমরা বলতে পারবো না যে ডেট কমপ্লিটেড বিলংস টু বোথ এন্টিটিস, কারণ এমপ্লয়ি আর কোর্স দোনোটার মধ্যেই যদি ডেট কমপ্লিটেড রেখে দেই, দোনোটার মধ্যেই রেখে দিলাম, উইল ইট ওয়ার্ক দেন? নো, ইভেন দেন ইট ওয়ন্ট ওয়ার্ক। দোনোটার মধ্যে ডেট কমপ্লিটেড রেখে দিলাম, এই যে এমপ্লয়ের মধ্যেও রাখলাম, কোর্সের মধ্যেও রাখলাম, উইল ইট ওয়ার্ক দেন? ইভেন দেন ইট ওয়ন্ট ওয়ার্ক। It actually belongs to the relationship. You need both employee and course along with date completed, yes, but it belongs to the relationship. An employee completes a course, only then you get date completed. So individually or বসাতে পারবো না, only when an employee completes a course, then you get date completed. So it belongs to the relationship. Yes.
Ma'am, it's small confusion. The heading M to N, N meaning
Many, M meaning many. Both of them represents many. M to N. N হচ্ছে গিয়ে multiple represent করছে, M ও multiply represent করছে. So M and N, they could be different numbers or the same. We don't know that. So এটার জন্য হচ্ছে গিয়ে M N use করা, but it represents many to many. M is to N always represents many to many. Where M is an integer, N is an integer. Positive integer. Now, an employee may complete multiple courses. A course may be completed by multiple employees. However, when a single employee instance completes a single course, the date on which the course was completed, that value is stored in the date completed relational attribute. And that is why it's a relational attribute. That is, the attribute belongs to the completes relationship. It's an attribute that belongs to the relationship. Neither employee nor course. It belongs to the relationship. Because we get this value only when this relationship takes place. যখন একজন এমপ্লয়ি ইনস্টেন্স একটা কোর্স ইনস্টেন্স এর সাথে রিলেটেড হলো, তখনই আমরা এই ভ্যালুটা পাচ্ছি, তার আগে। So it belongs to the relationship. Now, more importantly, how do we map it into the relational schema design? First of all, employee আর কোর্সকে ম্যাপ করি। Employee and course, both of them will be mapped as usual. These two are regular attributes. So employee will be mapped into a relation, just how a regular entity is mapped. একটা regular entity, employee একটা regular entity, যেভাবে ম্যাপ করি ওভাবে করব। Employee primary key, then the regular attributes, name and birthday, and then the name of the relation, employee at the top left corner, and then same goes for course ID, course title. তাহলে এই many to many রিলেশনশিপের জন্য আমরা রেফারেন্সটা কিভাবে রাখবো? What we do for a many to many relationship, unlike the other cardinalities, অন্যান্য cardinalityর মতো many to many রিলেশনশিপকে হ্যান্ডেল করা যাবে না। Many to many রিলেশনশিপের জন্য you need to create a new relation to represent the many to many relationship. A complex রিলেশনশিপের জন্য আমরা একটা নতুন রিলেশন ক্রিয়েট করতে হবে। Why? Because it was a many to many relationship. যেহেতু এটা many to many রিলেশনশিপ ছিল, ওই জন্য আমরা একটা নতুন রিলেশন ক্রিয়েট করতে হবে। Right? Why is that? Because an employee may complete multiple courses. একটা এমপ্লয়ি যদি মাল্টিপল কোর্স কমপ্লিট করতে পারে, তাহলে এমপ্লয়ি রিলেশনের মধ্যে কোর্স আইডি নামের কোনো ফরেন কি কি রাখতে পারবো? Think about the previous example. কাস্টমারের মধ্যে অর্ডার আইডি কেন রাখতে পারিনি? Why could we not place order ID in customer? Why did we have to place customer ID in order? কাস্টমার আইডি কে অর্ডারের মধ্যে রাখতে হয়েছে, এইভাবেই হচ্ছে কি রেফারেন্সটা মেইনটেইন করতে হবে, not the other way around. That is order ID কাস্টমারে রেখে রেফারেন্স মেইনটেইন করতে পারবো না. Why not? Think about that. Why not?
মাল্টি ভ্যালু।
That's right, multi-valued হয়ে যায়. What happens here if an employee may complete multiple courses? আর ধরে নিলাম একজন এমপ্লয়ি মাল্টিপল কোর্স কমপ্লিট করেছে, এখানে যদি কোর্স আইডি নামে একটা ফরেন কি রাখি, প্রবলেমটা কোথায় হবে? একটা সিঙ্গেল এমপ্লয়ির জন্য মাল্টিপল কোর্স আইডি ভ্যালু, কোন ভ্যালুটাকে রাখবো? We don't know. সবগুলোকে রাখতে গেলে কোন প্রবলেমটা হবে? Becomes multi-valued. We cannot do that either.
Value rule violate করবে।
That's right. So can we do it the other way around? Can we place employee ID in the course relation then? Can we place employee ID as a foreign key in the course relation? তাহলে course relation employee ID foreign key হিসেবে রাখি, will that work?
No, miss.
Why not?
One course may have different employees completing it.
That's right, multiple employees. একটা single course multiple different employees complete করেছে, হতেই পারে. So if you place employee ID here, which employee are you representing here? There is no way to do that. So that's why you cannot place the foreign key in the employee relation. You cannot place the foreign key in the course relation either. Why? Because this is a many-to-many relationship. Right? So we create a new relation. We create a new relation. We place the employee ID and course ID in the new relation as references, and the relational attribute which belongs to the relationship will come in this new relation. এই নতুন যে রিলেশনটা ক্রিয়েট করেছি টু রিপ্রেজেন্ট দ্য কমপ্লিট রিলেশনশিপ, এই কমপ্লিট রিলেশনশিপকে রিপ্রেজেন্ট করার জন্যই তো আমরা এই নতুন রিলেশনটা ক্রিয়েট করেছি, এখানের মধ্যে আমরা রেফারেন্সগুলোকে রাখছি. সো দ্য রিলেশনাল অ্যাট্রিবিউট which originally belonged to the complete relationship will also be placed under this new relation. এই নতুন যে রিলেশনটা ক্রিয়েট করলাম এখানে এটা, because this relation represents the complete relationship. The employee ID for the employee who completed a certain course, course ID for that course, date on which they completed. So employee ID 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, course ID let's say 120, all right, course ID 120, and date completed, some value. And then another row, employee ID 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then course ID a different course, maybe let's say 4, 2, 3, all right, and then date completed for that. এভাবে করে হচ্ছে কি প্রত্যেকটা রো ইউনিক হচ্ছে. Why is every single row going to be unique? Because in this new table, while there could be multiple rows with the same employee ID value, multiple rows with the same course ID value, but the combination will be unique. একজন এমপ্লয়ি একটা কোর্স, একটা সিঙ্গল কোর্স, একটা the same course they will complete it only once. That makes sense, right? So the combination will be unique. একজন এমপ্লয়ি মাল্টিপল কোর্স কমপ্লিট করলে সে যতগুলো কোর্স কমপ্লিট করেছে ততগুলো রোতে তার এমপ্লয়ি আইডি রিপিটেড হবে. লেটস সে ফর এক্সাম্পল a certain employee has completed 4 courses, চারটা রোতে তার আইডি রিপিটেড হবে. Let's say a course has been completed by 20 employees. In 20 rows, the course ID will be repeated. However, a single employee ID value and a single course ID value, the combination of the two will be unique. So, make employee ID and course ID, both of them together, the composite key. So, certificate relation, the new relation that we have created will have a composite key combined with employee ID and course ID together. And now we can place date completed here. The employee ID for the employee, the course ID for the course that they have completed, and the date completed on the date that they have completed the course. Now we can place date completed here. Right? And once again,
What
remember
is the bottom arrow referencing?
the same idea that the top arrow is referencing. Tell me what the top arrow is doing then, first of all. উপরে যে অ্যারোটা আছে, what is that doing?
Foreign key represent করছে.
Foreign key reference-টা দেখাচ্ছে, তাই না? Employee ID is a part of the
Composite
primary key.
যেহেতু solid.
Employee ID is a part of the primary key. That's why we have a solid underline. তাহলে এমপ্লয়ি আইডি যে একটা ফরেন কি, এটা কিভাবে বুঝাবো? এই অ্যারো দিয়ে বুঝাচ্ছি, বিকজ অরিজিনালি এমপ্লয়ি আইডি তো এমপ্লয়ি রিলেশন থেকে আসছে। এখানে তো এমপ্লয়ি আইডি is referencing the employee ID primary key of the employee relation. So for that we have the arrow here, and for the same reason we have the arrow here. Course ID here, this course ID came from who? কোথা থেকে আসছে এই course ID ভ্যালুটা?
Course.
From the course relation. It originally belongs to who? Think about that. Course ID was originally the primary key of the course entity. Course ID was originally the primary key of the course entity. So course ID at the source is the primary key of the course relation. And from there, we are referencing the value of course ID here as a foreign key in the certificate relation. Course ID here is a part of the primary key. That's why we have the solid underline. However, it's also the foreign key. Why? Because course ID originally was the primary key of the course relation. Hence, এই জায়গাটায় course ID is the foreign key which is referencing the primary key course ID of the course relation. আর এই বিষয়টাই represent করার জন্য we have the arrow, the arrowhead pointing towards the origin, telling us that course ID is a foreign key referencing the course ID primary key of the course relation. Clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And now the name of the new relation, certificate. Do you have to spend that much time to think of a name of a new relation like this one? No, you don't need to. Employee skill relation, এর নাম যেভাবে বানিয়েছি, very simply, the name of the entity, the name of the attribute combined together. Similarly, we can do the same thing here. এই জায়গায় certificate, instead of certificate, if the name was simply employee course, completely fine, or course employee, completely fine. So in the exam, you won't have the time. So কি করতে পারি? Simply যে এন্টিটি গুলো অরিজিনালি ছিল এমপ্লয়ি এন্ড কোর্স, দ্য স্ট্রং এন্টিটিস, যে দুটার মাঝে রিলেশনশিপটার জন্য আমরা এই নতুন রিলেশনটা বানিয়েছি, ওই দুইটা এন্টিটির নামকে আমি কম্বাইন করে দিব ফাস্টেস্ট ওয়ে। এমপ্লয়ি কোর্স দোনোটাকে কম্বাইন করে এখানে আমি এমপ্লয়ি কোর্স নাম দিয়ে দিব। This is the employee relation, this is the course relation, this will be our employee course relation. The name of this relation will be employee course combined together. You can just do something like that. You don't have to think of a name that, let's say, would be more suitable. You don't have to think of that. Just simply, originally যে দুটো এন্টিটি ছিল আমার ERD তে, ওই দুটো এন্টিটির নাম নিয়ে এসে কম্বাইন করে রিলেশনের নাম বানিয়ে ফেলি। ঠিক আছে? No need to spend more time on that. As long as the name of the relation, as long as each name of each of the relation is unique, that's fine with us. Okay. Now, similar scenario, but the cardinality is different. We still have a binary relationship. We still have a relational attribute which belongs to the relationship. However, the cardinality is different. Imran Siam, can you hear me?
Yes, miss.
Help us out here. What is the cardinality of this relationship, the in-charge relationship?
A binary.
Cardinality. Cardinality is binary. All right. In that case, what about the degree?
Sorry, miss. The degree binary.
Okay. Yes, degree is binary. What is the cardinality then?
1 to 1.
That's right. To be specific, the cardinality is mandatory 1 to optional 1. Sorry, mandatory 1 to optional 1. Yes, that's right. The cardinality is 1 to 1. Specifically, it's mandatory 1 to optional 1. Right? Okay. Thank you, Imran. So, what does that mean then? 1-to-1 relationship. What does that mean here? That means a nurse may be in charge of one care center, and on the other hand, a single care center has exactly one nurse in charge. So এক জায়গায় মেয়ে আরেক জায়গায় exactly, ঠিক আছে? So now the more important question, how do we map it into our relation? Schema design. First of all, just like before, regular জিনিসগুলো, let's get them out of the way. Nurse, এন্টিটি আছে একটা রেগুলার এন্টিটি, ওটার জন্য একটা রিলেশন বানালাম, নার্স রিলেশন, নার্স আইডি, নার্স নেম, নার্স ডেট অফ বার্থ, নার্স বার্থডে গেল। কেয়ার সেন্টার একটা রেগুলার এন্টিটি, কেয়ার সেন্টারের রেগুলার এন্টিটি থেকে রিলেশনে ম্যাপ করলাম care center relation with the center ID primary key, as you can see here, center location regular attribute here. এতটুকু গেল, these are the regular stuff. Gone. Now next we need to find a way to represent this relationship. প্রত্যেকটা রিলেশনশিপের জন্য আমরা কি করি, ফরেন কি প্রাইমারি কি রেফারেন্স রাখি। For this relationship we'll do the same. Now in case of a one-to-many relationship, we know that the reference has to be placed in the many side. Many side যে এন্টিটিটা আছে, ওই এন্টিটিটার জন্য যে রিলেশনটা ক্রিয়েট করলাম, ওই রিলেশনের মধ্যে আমরা ফরেন কি রেফারেন্সটা রাখবো। In case of many to many, we cannot do either. We have to create a new relation আর ফরেন কি রেফারেন্স গুলো নতুন রিলেশনে রাখতে হবে। In case of a one-to-one relation, however, কোনো সাইডেই মেনির ঝামেলা নেই। So in this case actually যে কোনো একটা সাইডেই রেফারেন্সটা রাখলেই চলে। You can place it on the left hand side or the right hand side. That's fine. Why? Because it's a one-to-one relationship. That means a nurse may be in charge of one care center, but one, not more than that. Not more than one. A care center will have exactly one nurse in charge, exactly one, not more than that. So that's why আমরা either nurse's side রাখতে পারি or care center side রাখতে পারি। যে কোনো একটা সাইডে রেফারেন্সটা রাখতে পারি। আগের মতো কোনো ঝামেলা এখানে নেই, কারণ কোনো সাইডে মেনি পার্টিসিপেশন নেই। Both sides have one participation. So যে কোনো একটা সাইডে রাখতে। However, in this mapping, the foreign key reference is placed in the care center relation. And I would say that that is the better design. Nurse relation এ না রেখে care center এর মধ্যে foreign key reference টা রাখাটা is the better way to go. Why is that?
Because nurse যেহেতু এটা অপশনালি কাজ করবে কেয়ার সেন্টারে, so it doesn't, we shouldn't keep the data assigned in the nurse
Why?
relation.
Why?
Because it's optional for the nurse, but care center এর জন্য
Optional
they
হলে
always
what-
have.
একটা
Optional
নার্সের
হলে
care
Miss,
center
can
We
we
can
fix
keep
it
it
better
none
sometimes?
basically.
That's right. It could be null. আমি যেখানে জানি যে nullের possibility আছে, why will I choose that option? That's right. Because it's optional, because a nurse may be in charge of one care center. That is, এমন nurse থাকতেই পারে who are not in charge of any care center at all. There could be a nurse who is not in charge of any care center. In that case, নার্সের মধ্যে যদি সেন্টার আইডি নামের কোনো ফরেন কি রাখতাম, নার্সের মধ্যে যদি রাখতাম, that could have been null for some instances. যেই নার্সগুলো, the nurses who are not in charge of any care center, for those nurses the center ID value would have been null যদি ফরেন কিটা নার্সে রাখতাম। That's why we are not doing that. That's why instead we are placing the foreign key in the care center relation, because we see that a care center will always have a nurse in charge. A care center, a single care instance will have exactly one nurse in charge. A single care instance will have exactly one nurse in charge. What does that mean? Exactly one, not more, not less. Every single care center will have one nurse in charge. So nurse in charge, if we place that as a foreign key in the care center relation, that one will never be null. It will always have a value because of the mandatory participation, mandatory. So we place the foreign key in the care center relation.
Ma'am,
Now,
it
the name,
doesn't,
yes.
it doesn't matter if we change the attribute name, like here it is nurse in charge.
Instead of that, if you place your nurse ID, completely fine.
Okay.
You don't need to spend any time thinking up a cool name or a name that makes more sense or anything like that. Don't bother. Directly ID তে যা দেয়া আছে, use that. As simple as that. এখানে nurse ID দেয়া আছে, directly এখানে nurse ID এনে দাও. That's fine. Because of the dash underline and because of the arrow, we will know that it is referencing the nurse ID of primary key of the nurse relation. Right? and ERD টা দেখে যে কেউ বুঝতে পারবে that is the nurse in charge. You don't have to spend that amount of time in the exam thinking আচ্ছা নামটা কি হবে নার্স ইন চার্জ হবে কিনা নো জাস্ট ডিরেক্টলি ERD তে যা দেয়া আছে ওটাই ইউজ করব এখানে নার্স আইডি রাখলে that would have been fine. Now since it's a foreign key we have the dashed underline. You must use the dashed underline whenever it's a foreign key, except for when the foreign key is a part of the primary key or is the primary key as well. However, the arrow will always be there. The arrow telling us which primary key is it referencing. If it's a foreign key, it must be referencing some primary key. Who is it referencing? It's referencing the nurse ID primary key of the nurse relation, right? So that's how we do it. In case of a one-to-one relationship, the rule of thumb is that place the foreign key on the entity which is on the optional side. Optional side e je entity ta ache tar relation er moddhe primary key ta foreign key ta place koro. That's the rule of thumb. However, if this was a mandatory one to mandatory one relationship ta jodi mandatory one to mandatory one hoto, it absolutely would not have mattered যে কোন রিলেশনের মধ্যে আমি ফরেন কিটা প্লেস করলাম যদি দোনো সাইডে ম্যান্ডেটরি হতো also যদি দোনো সাইডে অপশনাল হতো once again it wouldn't have mattered where you placed it because on one side you have mandatory and one side you have optional. That's why you should place it in the relation which is created for the entity on the optional side. Optional side যে entity আছে তার রিলেশনের মধ্যে আমি ফরেন কিটা রাখবো ঠিক আছে that's the rule of thumb. However, if you want to think about it logically যদি চিন্তা করো, which actually helps me. I don't go with the rule of thumb because instead of memorizing, if you think about it logically, it's easier and it's more fruitful. So if you think about it logically, just think about how to avoid null values. একটা care center এর exactly একটা nurse in charge always থাকবে. So foreign key আমি care center এর মধ্যে রাখবো. However, একটা nurse may or may not work for a care center. So we will not put the foreign key in the nurse relation because it could end up in null values.
Miss, দুইটাই যদি optional থাকে তাইলে there is a chance that it can be
Yes.
null value, right?
Remember, foreign keys can be null. Hey, foreign key value যদি null হয় আমরা তো কোনো rule break করছি না. But which one is the better design? এখানে এক সাইডে mandatory এক সাইডে optional থাকার কারণে better design worse design এর একটা বিষয় চলে আসছে which is the better design because if we know that there is a null value and it can be avoided যদি জানি যে there is a way of avoiding it then take the path where you can avoid it. But যদি দোনো সাইডে optional থাকে yes there may be null values but can you avoid it? No, you cannot. দোনো সাইডে optional, so it doesn't matter. All right, when it's optional one to optional one, it doesn't matter where you place the foreign key. যে কোনো একটাতে রাখলেই চলবে, but only one. Also on that note, don't ever make the mistake of placing the foreign key in both relations. I have seen that mistake done over and over again. See here, in this one-to-many case, এই one-to-many case এর ক্ষেত্রে foreign key কিন্তু শুধুমাত্র একটা রিলেশনে প্লেস করা হয়েছে। Many সাইডে যে এন্টিটিটা আছে ওই এন্টিটি রিলেশনে আমরা foreign keyটা প্লেস করেছি, but only in that one. Don't make the mistake of placing the foreign key on both relations. Wrong. Here as well, don't make that mistake. You'll have only one reference. যে কোনো একটা রিলেশনে রাখলেই চলবে। If you put it in both relations, that's wrong. Okay? Now, moving on. Associative entities. Associative entities এর ক্ষেত্রে কি করব? Once again, simply first of all, regular entity যেগুলো আছে, regular entity গুলোকে relational schema তে map করব। Order, regular entity, simply order ID, order date, as usual. Product, regular entity, product ID, and the rest of the regular attributes of the product entity placed in the product relation as usual. Fine. And then we have the associative entity. For the associative entity, we create a new relation. For the associative entity, নাম মধ্যে আছে order line, we create the new order line relation. Associative entity যদি নিজস্ব কোনো attribute থাকে, ওই attribute গুলো we place those attributes in the new relation. For the associative entity. Associative entity জন্য যে রিলেশনটা ক্রিয়েট করেছি, we place the attributes there. Now, notice that this associative entity does not have a primary key. Can we replicate that in a relational schema? That is, Can we have a relation with no primary keys in the relational schema?
No, ma'am.
No. Every single relation in the relational schema must have a primary key. So আমরা যখন এই অ্যাসোসিয়েটিভ এন্টিটির জন্য একটা নতুন রিলেশন বানাচ্ছি অর্ডার লাইন নামে, এই রিলেশনেরও একটা প্রাইমারি কি থাকতেই হবে। প্রাইমারি কি তো দেয়া নেই। How do we make up the primary key? Simply take up the primary key of the strong entities this associative entity is related to. এই associative এন্টিটিটা যে স্ট্রং এন্টিটি গুলার মাঝে রিলেশনশিপ স্টাবলিশ করার জন্য ক্রিয়েট করা হয়েছে, দ্যাট ইজ ইন সিম্পল ওয়ার্ডস the associative the relation the entities, the strong entities or the regular entities who are related with or associated with this associative entity, ওই এন্টিটি গুলোর প্রাইমারি কি কে সিম্পলি এখানে নিয়ে আসবে, as simple as that. This associative entity order line is associated with the order entity and the product entity. So order entity or product entity primary key gulo, order ID and product ID respectively, will bring them into the new relation, and combining those two together will make up the primary key of the new relation. As simple as that. Look at the relationships as well. Jodi individual relationship line gulo dekho, even then it will make sense. What is the degree and cardinality of this relationship, guys? This one between order and order.
Mandatory one to mandatory many.
That is the cardinality. That's right.
Oh,
so
sorry.
the cardinality is mandatory one to mandatory many, right? Okay, and the degree is binary. The degree is not important here. Let's go with the cardinality. So cardinality is mandatory one to mandatory many. Fine. And remember what we did when we had a one-to-many relationship to be mapped into the relational schema design. A one-to-many relationshipটাকে relational schema design কিভাবে ম্যাপ করেছি আমরা? মেনি সাইডে যে এন্টিটিটা আছে, মেনি সাইডের এন্টিটি রিলেশনের মধ্যে আমরা ফরেন কিটা রেখেছি। কার ফরেন কি? রেফারেন্সিং হু? The foreign key referencing who? Referencing
entity.
that's right. The primary key of the entity on the one side যে এন্টিটিটা আছে তার প্রাইমারি কি কে রেফারেন্স করে আমরা ফরেন কিটা রেখেছি। মেনি সাইডের রিলেশন we'll do the same thing here, as simple as that. মেনি সাইডে কি আছে? অর্ডার লাইন। সো অর্ডার লাইনের মধ্যে আমি রেফারেন্সটা রাখবো। কার রেফারেন্স রাখবো? ওয়ান সাইডে যে এন্টিটি আছে তার প্রাইমারি কি রেফারেন্সটা রাখবো, as simple as that. So many sided order line আছে, many sided মধ্যে আমি রেফারেন্সটা রাখবো। order ID referencing the primary key of the order entity or the order relation, right? Think of it another way as well. One to many relationship মানে কি? A single order instance could be there in multiple order line instances. At least একটা তো থাকবে or more. However, a single order line instance, একটা single row, order line table একটা single row তে, for a single row of order line, there will be exactly one order ID. একটা single order line instance এর জন্য, that is order line table এর মধ্যে আমি যদি একটা single row চিন্তা করি, ওই রোতে একটা single order ID থাকবে। That row will be associated with exactly one order ID, exactly one order ID. However, a single order ID may be associated, will be associated with at least one or more order line instances. So একটা order ID যদি multiple order line instances সাথে related থাকে, obviously order line এর কোনো কিছু আমি order ID এর মধ্যে রাখতে পারবো। However, order line এর জন্য একটা single order line instance এর জন্য তো order ID টা unique. That is, for a single order line row, there will be only one order ID, because exactly we can think of it that way as well. So order line এর মধ্যে আমরা order ID reference-টা রাখবো। On this side as well, what is the cardinality? One to many. Once again, one to many. So similarly, আমরা one to many এর ক্ষেত্রে এখানে যা করেছি একই জিনিস এখানে করব। Many side-এ কোন এন্টিটিটা আছে? Which entity is on the many side? Which entity do we have here on the many side?
Order line.
That's right. We have order line on the many side. So many side e kintu amra reference ta rakhi. Remember here, where did we place the reference? On the many side. Many side reference রেখেছি. Many side reference রেখেছি. এখানেও একই কাজই করবো। মেনি সাইডে রেফারেন্সটা রাখবো। মেনি সাইডে কি আছে? অর্ডার লাইন। সো অর্ডার লাইনে যে রিলেশনটা আছে ওখানের মধ্যে রেফারেন্সটা রাখবো। কার রেফারেন্স? Reference of the primary key of the entity on the one side, product ID. That's right. So product ID একটা রেফারেন্স রাখলাম। As simple as that. এখন অর্ডার লাইনের নিজস্ব কোনো প্রাইমারি কি নেই। So what can we do? We will simply combine order ID and product ID together to make up the composite key of order line relation, to make up the primary key of order line relation. Okay. Because since a single order ID instance can be associated with multiple order line instances, that is একটা order line table, if we have an order line table ওখানের মধ্যে একটা single order ID multiple rowতে থাকতে পারে, multiple different rowতে same order ID থাকতে পারে. Similarly, a product ID may be associated with multiple order line instances. তার মানে কি order line table multiple rowতে একই product ID থাকতে পারে. However, the combination is going to be unique. The order ID, product ID, the combination obviously will be unique. একটা single order ID তে একটা single product ID repeated হওয়ার তো কোনো reason নেই. The order ID, the product ID, and how many products were ordered for that product ID. এটা তো কোনো repetition থাকার reason নেই. So order ID and product ID, that combination will be unique. Order ID alone will not be unique in order line relation because as we can see here from this relationship, there will be multiple, there can be multiple rows with the same order ID. And from this relationship, we can see that there may be multiple rows with the same product ID as well, but the combination will be unique. Correct? So together they make up the composite primary key of the order line relation. And at the same time, we still have the arrows because they are still foreign keys for the order line relation, referencing the order ID, primary key of the order relation, and product ID, primary key of the product relation. So whenever you have an associative entity, rule of thumb, create a new relation for that associative entity. Place the attributes of the associative entity in the new relation. Bring in the primary key of the entities it is related to or associated with. Bring the primary keys of those entities into the associative entity. Rule of thumb. And then if the associative entity does not have any primary key of its own, in that case, combine the primary key of the other two regular entities together to make up the primary key of the new relation. First and foremost, একটা নতুন রিলেশন বানাবো অ্যাসোসিয়েটিভ এন্টিটিটাকে রিপ্রেজেন্ট করার জন্য। এরপরে অ্যাসোসিয়েটিভ এন্টিটির নিজস্ব যে অ্যাট্রিবিউটগুলো আছে ওগুলোকে প্লেস করব নতুন রিলেশনে। এরপরে এই অ্যাসোসিয়েটিভ এন্টিটিটা যেই এন্টিটিগুলোর সাথে রিলেটেড অর অ্যাসোসিয়েটেড ওই এন্টিটিগুলোর প্রাইমারি কিকে নিয়ে আসবো নতুন রিলেশনে। নতুন রিলেশনে ওই প্রাইমারি কিগুলোকে নিয়ে আসবো as references. And then if the associative entity does not have its own primary key, তার নিজস্ব কোনো প্রাইমারি কি যদি না থাকে, then আমরা যেই প্রাইমারি কি গুলোকে নিয়ে আসলাম ওই দুটোকে কম্বাইন করে কম্পোজিট প্রাইমারি কি বানাবো। As simple as that. Now then, what if the associative entity has its own primary key? See here, what is the difference in this example? Shipment, once again, is an associative entity. By the way, guys, how do we know that shipment, order line, these are associative entities?
Because the rounded.
That's right, the rounded edges. Please remember that. Associative entities have rounded edges. Look at the notation. So that's why we know that order line and shipment, these are associative entities. Now, once again, same rule follow করি। Shipment associative entity, so তার জন্য আমি একটা নতুন রিলেশন ক্রিয়েট করব। শিপমেন্টের মধ্যে যে অ্যাট্রিবিউটগুলো আছে সিম্পলি ওই অ্যাট্রিবিউটগুলোকে নতুন রিলেশনে বসিয়ে দিব। অলসো এই শিপমেন্ট এন্টিটিটা যেই এন্টিটিগুলোর সাথে অ্যাসোসিয়েটেড ছিল, the entities with which this shipment associative entity was related or associated, ওই এন্টিটিগুলোর প্রাইমারি কিকে এই নতুন রিলেশনে নিয়ে আসবো। কাস্টমারের সাথে রিলেটেড ছিল, সো কাস্টমারের প্রাইমারি কি কাস্টমার আইডিকে এই নতুন রিলেশনে নিয়ে আসবো। ভেন্ডরের সাথে রিলেটেড ছিল, as we can see ভেন্ডরের সাথে অ্যাসোসিয়েটেড ছিল, সো ভেন্ডরের প্রাইমারি কি ভেন্ডর আইডিকে নিয়ে আসবো নতুন রিলেশন। However, this time we do not need to make the primary key out of customer ID and vendor ID. Customer ID, vendor ID কে ইউজ করে primary key বানানো লাগছে না। Why is that?
already
Saving
unique.
the shipment ID.
Because shipment already has its own primary key, shipment ID. That's right. When that's the case, you don't need to create a primary key out of the references. All right. Because shipment has its own primary key already. That's why simply নতুন রিলেশনে এই shipment ID কে primary key হিসেবে use করব as it is. All right. And customer ID and vendor ID, those two will remain as foreign key references. In the previous case as well, these two were foreign key references as well, but they were a part of the primary key. Together they made up the composite primary key because order line didn't have its own primary key. Here, however, this associative entity has its own primary key. That's why that one is the primary key of the new relation as well. And the primary keys of the entities with which this shipment entity is related, those will remain here simply as foreign key references. But foreign key reference কিন্তু রাখতে হবে, রাখতে কিন্তু হবে. Why? Because of this relationship. Remember, for every relationship we must have foreign key primary key references. So because of this relationship we have this foreign key primary key reference, foreign key primary key reference. And since they're not of the part of the primary key, this time we must use the dash underline. Any questions so far? Okay. In that case, let's see how we can map unary relationships. Why is this a unary relationship, guys?
একটা entity,
Only one entity.
Only one entity, which means that this relationship is there to represent the relationship between the instances of the employee instance with itself. একটা employee instance এর সাথে আরেকটা employee instance এর relationship represent করতে we have this relationship. Employee instances related with other employee instances. Okay, that's why it's a unary relationship, relating an entity with itself. Okay, now how do we map that into our relational schema design? First of all, let's take a look at the cardinality. What is the cardinality? One to many.
one to many.
That's right. So since it's one to many, what does that mean? An employee may manage multiple other employees. Fine. However, an employee may be managed by one other employee. Because it's a one-to-many relationship, if we use this part here, the fact that an employee is managed by one other employee, may be managed by an employee, may be managed by one other employee, এই জিনিসটা যদি আমরা ইউজ করি তাহলে কি বলতে পারি? একজন এমপ্লয়ির একটাই ম্যানেজার থাকতে পারে at max. An employee may be managed by one other employee. What does that mean? An employee may be managed by one other employee. একজন এমপ্লয়ি at max একটা ম্যানেজারই থাকতে পারে। যদি একজন এমপ্লয়ির একের অধিক ম্যানেজার না থাকে, if an employee cannot have more than one manager, we will simply place the manager ID as the reference within the same relation because it's a unary relationship. Unary যেহেতু আর কোনো এন্টিটি তো নেই, so একই রিলেশনের মধ্যেই রাখতে হবে। Within the employee relation, we'll have to place the manager ID foreign key reference.
Foreign key.
ম্যানেজার আইডি কেন রাখছি? বিকজ একজন এমপ্লয়ি দেখতে পাচ্ছি একের বেশি ম্যানেজার থাকবে না, বিকজ an employee may be managed by one other employee, not more than one. So that's why আমরা বলতে পারি যে একজন এমপ্লয়ি একটা ম্যানেজার থাকতে পারে, not more than one, একটা ম্যানেজার থাকতে পারে। That's why আমরা ম্যানেজার আইডি এখানে রেখে দিই। Because if you look at it the other way around, an employee may manage multiple other employees. এইটা ইউজ করে তো আমরা মডেল করতে পারবো না। If an employee may manage multiple other employees, in that case একটা সিঙ্গেল এমপ্লয়ি মাল্টিপল আদার এমপ্লয়িজ এর সাথে রিলেটেড থাকতে পারে। সো ইন দ্যাট কেস কি হচ্ছে, যদি ওই রেফারেন্সটা রাখতে যাই ওই মাল্টি ভ্যালিড হচ্ছে, অথবা কাকে রাখবা এটা তো বোঝার কোনো উপায় নেই। সো দ্যাটস ওয়াই আমরা এই যে ওয়ান সাইডটাকে ইউজ করব, দ্যাট ইজ অ্যান এমপ্লয়ি মে বি ম্যানেজড বাই ওয়ান আদার এমপ্লয়ি। মে বি ম্যানেজড বাই ওয়ান আদার এমপ্লয়ি মানে কি, একজন এমপ্লয়ি একটা ম্যানেজার থাকতে পারে, অ্যাট ম্যাক্স একটা ম্যানেজার থাকতে পারে। যদি একটা এমপ্লয়ি ইনস্টেন্সের একটাই ম্যানেজার থাকে at max, for a single employee instance, if there can be one manager, only one manager at max, in that case we will place the manager ID as the foreign key. So what happens here? The employee and their manager. So what the table is going to look like is this. This is what the table will look like. Let's say, for example, a certain employee ID with the employee name, a certain employee name, and then the ID, the employee ID of its manager. Employee ID 13 এর manager কে 17. What is this 17? What does this 17 represent? এই 17টা কাকে represent করছে?
The manager.
Yes, manager employee ID.
Manager যে এমপ্লয়িটা, ওই এমপ্লয়ির আইডিটা, that's right, exactly. And as you can see, surely in row number 5, we have employee ID 17. So this manager ID value is actually referencing this row. এই রোটাকে রেফারেন্স করছে। এই রো এর যে প্রাইমারি কি ভ্যালুটা আছে, this one is being referenced here. Similarly, for this employee as well, we have the same manager ID 17. Once again, referencing this employee here. So this is our employee. Employee ID is 18. Employee name is Norm sub 6 something. And who is the manager? Manager is the employee whose ID is 17. 18th number employee যে তার ম্যানেজার কে? ম্যানেজার হচ্ছে গিয়ে ওই এমপ্লয়িটা যার ID 17. Who is that? That is Norm sub 5. This one. This row here. And that person has another manager in turn. Let's say, for example, এখানে হচ্ছে একটা পয়েন্টে গিয়ে আরেকজন ম্যানেজার আছে 20 and then something, whatever. We go like that. It's referencing in that way. Any questions?
Miss, what happens if like unary at the degree you have many to many
We'll
cardinal?
look at that. In that case, this is not going to work. This solution is clearly not going to work in that case. Very good question. Many to many hole, it's not going to work. Can it work if it's many to many? This will work only as long as the cardinality is either 1 to 1 or 1 to many. As long as the cardinality is either 1 to 1 or 1 to many. It ছাড়া এই সলিউশন কাজ করবে না। এই সলিউশনটা কাজ করছে বিকজ এই ওয়ান সাইড যেটা আছে এটা আমাকে বলছে কি an employee may be managed by one of the managers. So একটা সিঙ্গেল এমপ্লয়ি ইনস্ট্যান্সের at max একজন ম্যানেজারই থাকে। That's why manager ID reference হিসেবে আমি এখানে রেখে দিতে পারছি, referencing the primary key of the same relation. As you can see here, manager ID is the foreign key. How do we know that? Because of this dashed underline. And then who is it referencing? It's referencing the employee ID primary key of the same employee relation. That works. But if it's many to many, it's not going to work. The same solution will not work. For many to many, just how we have done previously for many to many relationships. এই ক্ষেত্রে কি করেছি? একটা many to many relationship-এর জন্য আমরা এখানে কিভাবে solve করেছি প্রবলেমটা? What did we do for this many to many relationship to map this into the relational schema design?
To add a different.
We created a new relation, right? That's right. We created a different, separate new relation. We will do exactly the same thing wherever you find the many to many relationship. যেখানেই many to many relationship পাবা, আমরা একই জিনিসই করব। Even if it's a unary relationship. Unary relationship, but many to many. What will we do? We will create a new relation. As you can see here, item relation represents the item regular entity with item number, item description, unit cost, it's all of its attributes and so on. And then we create a new relation for the many to many relationship. Right? So item number, component number. What does that represent? An item may contain other items as components. An item could be component to multiple other items. So let's say, for example, একটা bicycle, ঠিক আছে? একটা bicycle একটা item কিন্তু. A bicycle is an item. Is it made up of only one component part?
No, many.
No, it has many component parts. Handlebars, bells, seats, brakes, suspension, so on. All right? Many component parts. So at a single item number, let's say bicycle একটা idea আছে, ওই bicycle কোন একটা idea আছে. Single item made up of multiple component parts. But each one of those component parts are also items, by the way. Handlebar নিজেও একটা item. Seat নিজেও একটা item. Produced by the manufacturing company, let's say. Bells, the suspension, the brake, and the gear, everything. All of them are items as well. So a single item, bicycle, is made up of component item parts. Component parts which are all items as well. However, a handlebar, can it belong to only this one bicycle? Can there not be other models, other bicycle models which has the same handlebar? হতেই পারে একটা সিরিজে, একটা বাইসাইকেল সিরিজে হ্যান্ডেলবার গুলো সেম, অন্যান্য জিনিস চেঞ্জ করা হয়েছে, এটা তো হতেই পারে।
Yes.
অন্য আরেকটা আইটেমও থাকতে পারে, কমপ্লিটলি ডিফারেন্ট একটা আইটেম। রিক্সা, একই হ্যান্ডেলবার একটা সাইকেলে ইউজ করা হয় বা একটা রিক্সাতে ইউজ করা হয়, হতেই পারে। রাইট? So in that case, what do we see? A single item can also be a component to multiple different items as well. Handlebar একটা item, এই itemটা, let's say item number 146 is the item ID for handlebar, and this 146 এই নাম্বার যেটা যে হ্যান্ডেলবারের আছে, এই হ্যান্ডেলবারটা একটা বাইসাইকেলে ইউজ করা হয়, একটা রিক্সাতে ইউজ করা হয়। Alright, there you go. So the component parts are items as well, which belong to a certain item maybe. However, at the same time, they can belong to multiple other items as well. So what can we do there? We can have the item number representing the ID of the item itself, and the component number representing the component parts of the item. Now, is this item number going to be unique in the component table? No. Item number component table unique hobe na. There can be multiple rows with the same item number. Why is that? Because if an item is made up of multiple components, একটা bicycle যদি ধরো আমি ধরে নিই একটা bicycle যদি 11টা component থাকে, ঠিক আছে? If a bicycle has 11 different components, a certain bicycle, a certain bicycle with the ID 379, let's say, has 11 different components. What's going to happen in the component table? In 11 different rows, the same item number will be repeated. 397 or 379, whatever that was. The same item number will be repeated. Now let's look at the component number. Will component number be unique in the component table then? Component number কি component table এ unique থাকবে?
প্রতিটা আইডির জন্য তো কম্পোনেন্ট নাম্বার ডিফারেন্ট থাকবে, রাইট?
No, think about component number on its own. Component number, the value component number.
A component can belong to multiple
items. That's right. A component, which is also an item itself, by the way, can be a component to multiple items. Let's say, for example, একটা seat, ঠিক আছে? A seat that you use in a bicycle. একটা সিরিজে, একটা bicycle সিরিজের প্রত্যেকটা bicycle, প্রত্যেকটা model which are different items, by the way, প্রত্যেকটা মডেলে একই seat use করা হচ্ছে, let's say. So the component number is the same, but the item number is different because all of these, even though their bicycles are different models. Forget that. Let's say, for example, the same seat is used for a bicycle and a rickshaw, and let's say an electric bicycle, an electric cycle, right? একটা electric cycle, একটা bicycle, একটা rickshaw, তিনোটা different item-এ একই seat use করা হয়েছে. The component number remains the same, but in all those three different rows, the same component number gets repeated. তিনটা different item. So তিনটা different row হবে. তিনটা different item যেহেতু, for the item number there will be three different rows in the component table. However, component number to same because it's the same seat. All right. So component number is not going to be unique on its own either. If a certain component belongs to multiple different items, that component number may be repeated across multiple rows. However, the combination will be unique. একটা সিঙ্গেল বাইসাইকেল আইটেমে একটা কম্পোনেন্ট ইউজ করা হয়েছে যেটা ওই কম্বিনেশন তো আমার রিপিট করার কোনো রিজন নেই সো দ্য কম্বিনেশন will be so the item number which is referencing the item number primary key of the item relation, the component number, the components of the item, which are also items themselves, and referencing the item number primary key of the item relation once again, together make up the primary key of the component relation. And any relational attribute this many-to-many relationship may have will also be placed into the new relation. So whenever you have a unary many-to-many relationship, what is the rule of thumb? Create a new relation for the relationship. Many-to-many relationship is, create a new relation, right? And how do we maintain the references? Simply have two separate referencing the same primary key of the original relation. Originally যে এন্টিটিটা ছিল তার যে রিলেশনটা আছে ওই রিলেশনের প্রাইমারি কিকে রেফারেন্স করছে এরকম দুটো রেফারেন্স আমার নতুন রিলেশনে রাখতে হবে as you can see here one referencing the item itself and the other one referencing the component parts which are also themselves items referencing the same primary and if there are any relation attributes place them in the new relation.
So miss আমি যদি component number-এর জায়গায় item number লিখতাম
that would be a
confusing.
problem. No, that is not just only confusing. You're breaking a rule there. That's a rule violation. You would definitely lose marks there.
Okay.
Remember that within the same relation, the attribute names must be unique. Within the same relation, attribute-এর নামগুলো কিন্তু unique হতে হবে. So component একটা relation এর মাঝে তুমি যদি দুটো attribute রাখো একই নামে that's wrong. You cannot do that. Here, if you are in a rush, could you do something like item number 1, item number 2? Yes, you could. Is it readable? Not necessarily. It's not necessarily very readable. Better yet, you could do item number and then contain item number. All right? Just use the name of the relationship. ERD তে যা দেয়া আছে ওই information use করো. রিলেশনশিপের নাম কি contains তাহলে একটার নাম দিব item number the item itself যে আইটেমটার কম্পোনেন্ট গুলোকে রিপ্রেজেন্ট করছি the item itself item number and then contain item number ঠিক আছে contain item number that represents the components. All right, if you cannot on the spot think of some name just use what you have in the ERD রিলেশনশিপের নাম দেয়া আছে contain so contain item number একটা হবে item number একটা হচ্ছে contain item number and what will be the name of the relation itself? Let's say item contain or contain item.
Contain item, yeah.
As simple as that. You don't have to spend too much time thinking of a name that makes more sense or anything like that. However, if you were to do something like item number 1, item number 2, you're not technically breaking any rule for sure, but it's not very readable. At least use what you have in the ERD. ERD the relationship এর নাম দেয়া আছে, so I mean at least ওই নামটা use করি. Item number, then item contain number or contain item number. The name of the relation would be item contain or contain item, something like that. Here, component makes more sense. That's why we use component. Okay. Moving on. Ternary relationship. As we can see here, this is a ternary relationship. This associative entity is representing a ternary relationship. How do we know that? Because this associative entity is associated with how many entities here? 3.
3.
তিনটা entities center আমরা associative entity টাকে place করেছি. So this associative entity represents a ternary relationship. So এরকম কেস হলে আমরা কি করব? It's very simple. First of all, patient physician treatment. We will treat them differently. আগে যেরকম করেছিলাম, remember, এই associative entity ক্ষেত্রে কি করেছি? The entities which were being associated, ওই entity গুলো কিন্তু as usual normally map করেছি. Just the relation and the attributes directly from the entity. Directly entity তে যে attribute গুলো আছে ওগুলাই এনেছি. Directly entity তে যে attribute গুলো আছে ওগুলাই এনেছি. First we will do that. সবার আগে we'll get that out. Patient এর জন্য একটা relation create করলাম, physician treatment for all of them we create relations. And simply যে attribute গুলো আছে as it is ওই attribute গুলোকে নিয়ে আসলাম. And then we handle the associative entity. So far associative entity ক্ষেত্রে কি করেছি? For the associative entity, what we have done so far, we'll do the same thing. What have we done so far for associative entities?
Created a new relation.
That's right. Create a new relation, and then what? Place the attributes of the associative entity in the new relation, right? And then what?
All the references to other entities we use as foreign keys
That's
if
right.
it
That's
doesn't have a primary key.
That's
If it has a primary key.
if it has a primary. So first and foremost, we create a new relation. We place all the attributes in the new relation, and then the entities which this associative entity is associating, ওই entity গুলোর primary key কে নিয়ে আসবো as references. And if it does not have a primary key, if the associative entity didn't have a primary key to begin with, in that case, the associative entity, the associative entity, the entities which it is related to, we make the primary keys of those entities the primary key of the new relation. We combine those primary keys to make up the primary key of the new relation. So we'll do the same thing here as well. This is an associative entity. তিনটা রিলেশনশিপ আছে অথবা টার্নারি রিলেশনশিপ, এটা দেখে ফ্রাজেল হওয়ার বা নার্ভাস হওয়ার কোনো কিছু নেই। We will treat it simply as an associative entity. Associative entity ক্ষেত্রে যা যা করে আসছি এটাই এখানে করব। As simple as that. Nothing special because it's a ternary relationship. Ternary relationship বলে এখানে আলাদা কোনো কিছু করা হবে না। Patient treatment is an associative entity, so we'll create a new relation for this associative entity. Simply যে attribute গুলো আছে, we place those attributes here. Treatment date, time, and results. And then also we bring in the primary keys of the entities it is associating. ঠিক আছে, যে প্রাইমারি কি গুলোকে অ্যাসোসিয়েট করার জন্য অ্যাসোসিয়েটিভ এন্টিটিটা এসেছে, ওই এন্টিটি গুলোর প্রাইমারি কি কে এখানে নিয়ে আসবো। as simple as that. just like before patient id অ্যাসোসিয়েট করা হচ্ছে, সো সরি পেশেন্ট এন্টিটি অ্যাসোসিয়েট করা হচ্ছে, সো পেশেন্ট আইডি আনা হচ্ছে। ফিজিশিয়ান অ্যাসোসিয়েট করা হচ্ছে, সো ফিজিশিয়ান আইডি আনা হচ্ছে। ট্রিটমেন্ট অ্যাসোসিয়েট করা হচ্ছে, সো ট্রিটমেন্টের প্রাইমারি কি ট্রিটমেন্ট কোড আনা হচ্ছে। alright, now this associative entity doesn't have its own primary key. What do we do then? So far what
We
have
make a composite key.
we make a composite key made up of the primary keys of the associated entities. Associated যে এন্টিটি গুলো তাদের প্রাইমারি কি গুলো এনেছি না, পেশেন্ট আইডি, ফিজিশিয়ান আইডি, ট্রিটমেন্ট কোড, ওই তিনটাকে কম্বাইন করে আমরা প্রাইমারি কিটা বানাতে পারি, কম্পোজিট প্রাইমারি কিটা বানাতে পারি। Now what if in the business rules, what if it states that a patient may visit a physician for a certain treatment on multiple dates. A patient may visit a physician for a certain treatment on multiple dates. Multiple date visit করতে পারে। তার মানে কি? তার মানে হচ্ছে কি, আমি যদি পেশেন্ট আইডি, ফিজিশিয়ান আইডি, ট্রিটমেন্ট কোড তিনটাকে কম্বাইন করি, even then it might not be unique. Even then it may not be unique. Even if we combine patient ID, physician ID, and treatment code, all three of them together, even then it may not be unique.
You have to make a different relation.
Come again?
We make a different relation.
No, we don't need a different relation. It says that a patient may visit a physician for a treatment on multiple dates. So
we add
combine করলাম,
the
and
date
then
to the treatment.
That's right. We bring in date into the loop as well. That is, we make date a part of the primary key as well. So far, কেন unique ছিল না? Why was it not unique so far? Because let's say if in the business rules it states that a patient can visit a physician for a certain treatment on multiple dates. তার মানে কি? একই patient ID, একটা single patient ID, একই patient ID, একই physician কে for the same treatment multiple date visit করতেই পারে। তাহলে for different dates the entire combination will be repeated. Think about it. Let's say, for example, Zakaria visits his usual family doctor for a headache that he has recurring. All right, migraine এর ব্যথা আছে. So treatment is migraine. Patient ID is Zakaria. This is just imaginary situation, all right? And physician is like a specific physician that they have as a family doctor. But he has visited that physician for the same treatment on Monday and Saturday, 2 different dates. All right, তাহলে কি হচ্ছে? তাহলে patient ID is Zakaria ID, physician is the same physician, treatment is the same treatment, date different. তার মানে কি দুটো ডিফারেন্ট রোতে একই ভ্যালু গুলো থাকছে। তাহলে এই কম্বিনেশনটা কি? Is it unique anymore?
No.
No, it's not unique. However, if you bring date into the loop, it may become unique. But wait, what if in the business rules it states that patient may visit a physician for the same treatment on different dates as well as different times on the same date as well? What if that is allowed? That is একটা patient একই ফিজিশিয়ানকে ফর দ্য সেম ট্রিটমেন্ট একই ডেটে ডিফারেন্ট টাইমেও ভিজিট করতে পারে, সকালে একবার গেল, রাতে একবার গেল, আর দোনোটা আমার রেকর্ড রাখতে হবে। ইন দ্যাট কেস হোয়াট ক্যান ইউ ডু? ইন দ্যাট কেস will the combination of these 4 attributes be unique? Patient ID, physician ID, treatment code, patient treatment date, এই চারটাকে কম্বাইন করে will it remain unique anymore?
No.
No, it won't be unique anymore. It won't be
We have
unique
to add
anymore.
time to
We have to add time as well to make it unique. Because on the same date, if a patient visits the same physician for the same treatment more than once on the same date, in that case, multiple rows will have the same value for all 4 of these: patient ID, physician ID, treatment code, and treatment date. So, our time-টাকে include করে, incorporate করে, unique বানাতে হবে. It all depends on the business rules. Business rules যদি এভাবেই বলা থাকে, then you'd have to do it that way. যদি বিজনেস রুলে এই জিনিসটা টাইমের বিষয়টা লেটস মেনশন করা নেই, তাহলে you can do it using the date maybe. But if it's mentioned that একই ডেটে ডিফারেন্ট টাইমে একটা পেশেন্ট সেম ফিজিশিয়ানকে ফর দ্য সেম ট্রিটমেন্ট ভিজিট করতে পারে, in that case you'd have to apply a bit of common sense there, translate that business rules and figure out that in that case normally associative entity ক্ষেত্রে যেটা করি যে simply এই যে patient ID, physician ID and treatment code কে combine করে primary key বানাবো, that is not going to work. You need to combine the other two as well. এটা মাথায় রাখতে হবে, ঠিক আছে? Make sense, guys?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, the last leg of the entire lecture: super type subtype relationships, how to model them into our relational schemas.
ম্যাম, আমার
Yes.
আগের স্লাইডে একটা কোশ্চেন ছিল।
Sure.
ম্যাম, এখানে পেশেন্ট ট্রিটমেন্ট রেজাল্টের নিচে আন্ডারলাইনটা নাই কেন? আমি না বুঝি নাই।
More importantly, date আর টাইমের মধ্যে নিচে আন্ডারলাইন আছে কেন? That is the question.
কারণ
Usually
হচ্ছে
associative
ইউনারি
entity ক্ষেত্রে কি করি? No. Unary কোত্থেকে আসে? Unary কোত্থেকে আসে? এই unary রিলেশনশিপ আছে নাকি?
মানে এটা কি ইউনিক করার জন্য, মানে একটা সেম
Unique
পেশেন্ট
করার জন্য,
সেম
but
ডেটে
that's
সেম
right.
টাইমে এরকম
That's
কিছু
right.
বোঝানো
ইউনিক
হয়েছে।
করার জন্য, that's right. এই যে এক্সাম্পলটা দেওয়ার জন্য ইউজুয়ালি আমরা অ্যাসোসিয়েটিভ এন্টিটিতে কি এরকম কিছু করে থাকি? ইউজুয়ালি এমন কিছু কি অ্যাসোসিয়েটিভ এন্টিটিতে করা হয়ে থাকে? Look at this here. Look at this scenario. Look at this scenario. More important. Associative entity একটা attribute আছে ordered quantity. Is ordered quantity a part of the primary key?
নো ম্যাম।
Why not? Because order ID, product ID এই কম্বিনেশনটাই এনাফ ইউনিক করার জন্য, আমার আর কিছু লাগবে না। The combination of order ID and product ID will be unique. We know that for sure. Order ID একা unique হবে না, product ID ও একা unique হবে না, but the combination will be unique. We know that. So এই দুটাকে প্রাইমারি কি বানালাম, যথেষ্ট ইউনিকলি আইডেন্টিফাই করার জন্য, রাইট? এখানে দেখো শিপমেন্ট আইডি ছাড়া আর বাকি কোনোটা কি প্রাইমারি কি আছে? No. Why?
No.
Because shipment ID is already the primary key of the shipment entity. That is, it's alone going to be enough to be unique. একা সে ইউনিকলি আইডেন্টিফাই করতে পারবে শিপমেন্টের সবগুলো ইনস্টেন্সকে। However, in this example we were saying বিজনেস রুলসে যদি বলে দেয়া থাকে, ধরো এমনি ইউজুয়ালি অ্যাসোসিয়েটিভ এন্টিটিতে কি করি? ইউজুয়ালি অ্যাসোসিয়েটিভ এন্টিটিতে যা করি এটা যদি ফলো করি তাহলে কি হয়? পেশেন্ট আইডি, ফিজিশিয়ান আইডি, ট্রিটমেন্ট কোড, এই তিনটাকে কম্বাইন করে আমি প্রাইমারি কি বানাবো। as simple as that. এটাই তো করে থাকি, তাই না?
ইয়েস ম্যাম।
তার নিজস্ব কোনো প্রাইমারি কি নেই, সো পেশেন্ট আইডি, ফিজিশিয়ান আইডি, ট্রিটমেন্ট কোড, তিনটাকে কম্বাইন করে প্রাইমারি কি বানালাম, গেল, শেষ। বাট যদি বিজনেস রুলসে বলে দেয়া থাকে, এমন কিছু যদি আলাদা করে বলে দেয়া থাকে বিজনেস রুলসে, a patient can visit the same physician for the same treatment on different dates এটা যদি বলে দেয়া থাকে একটা সিঙ্গেল পেশেন্ট একটা সিঙ্গেল সেম ফিজিশিয়ানকে একটা সিঙ্গেল সেম ট্রিটমেন্টের জন্য মাল্টিপল ডিফারেন্ট ডেটে যদি ভিজিট করতে হয় তখন একটু চিন্তা করে দেখো এই কম্বিনেশনটা কি আর ইউনিক থাকে কিনা
নো ম্যাম থাকে না
না তাহলে আমার
তখন
কি
এই
করতে
ডেট
হবে
আর টাইম
ডেটকেও
এটাকে হ্যাঁ
ইনকর্পোরেট করতে হবে এরপরে যদি বলে দেয়া থাকে আরো এটার জন্য তো আমরা ডেট ইনকর্পোরেট করলাম ফাইন গেল এরপরে আরেকটা লাইনে বলে দেয়া হলো that a patient can visit the same physician for the same treatment on the same date at multiple times
তখন টাইমও হচ্ছে
তখন আমার টাইমও লাগবে কারণ লেটস সে ফর एग्जांपल তুমি একটা ধরো সাইক্লিং ট্রিপে গেলা ঠিক আছে somehow you had an accident all right and then you visit a physician and they fix you up and then সকালবেলা you get it dressed and then রাতের বেলা হচ্ছে you need to change the dressing so you visit the physician twice what's happening patient ID is your patient ID same physician ID is the same physician
yes ma'am treatment কোডও সেম আর হচ্ছে ডেটটাও সেম টাইমটা ডিফারেন্ট
তাহলে কি হচ্ছে দুটো ডিফারেন্ট রোতে এই চারটা অ্যাট্রিবিউটের ভ্যালু কি সেম থাকছে না
yes ma'am
তাহলে আমার কি করতে হবে টাইম ইনক্লুড করে এটাকে ইউনিক বানাতে হবে
হ্যাঁ ম্যাম
কারণ প্রাইমারি কি তো ইউনিক হতে হবে দ্যাটস ওয়াই এই এক্সাম্পলটা দেওয়ার জন্য ইউজুয়ালি অ্যাসোসিয়েটিভ এন্টিটিতে আমরা হচ্ছে গিয়ে কি করে থাকি অ্যাসোসিয়েটিভ এন্টিটিতে যদি প্রাইমারি কি দেয়া না থাকে তাহলে হচ্ছে গিয়ে যে অ্যাসোসিয়েটেড যে এন্টিটিগুলো তাদের রিলেশনের প্রাইমারি গুলোকে নিয়ে এসে we will combine the two primary keys to make up the primary key of the new relation that's what we do if the associative entity doesn't have its own primary but এখানে এসে even that is not enough maybe because of the business rule এই জিনিসটা মাথায় রাখতে হবে alright
ওকে ম্যাম আচ্ছা থ্যাংক ইউ
যে আমাদের হচ্ছে গিয়ে অ্যাসোসিয়েটিভ এন্টিটি অনুযায়ী আমরা কাজটা করলাম ফাইন পেশেন্ট আইডি ফিজিশিয়ান আইডি ট্রিটমেন্ট কোড কম্বাইন করে প্রাইমারি কি বানালাম বাট একটু বিজনেস রুলসটাও পড়তে হবে দেখতে হবে যে আমার অন্য কোনো ঝামেলা বা কিছু আছে কিনা ঠিক আছে because of which we made these two a part of the primary key as well to make it unique acha now moving on super type subtype relationships here which one is the super type guys
Employee
is the super type and which one is the subtype
hourly employee, salaried employee, and a consultant.
That's right. We have three subtypes. Super type is the employee. Underneath employee, we have the subtypes: hourly employee, salaried employee, consultant. What are the constraints on this super type subtype relationship?
Total specialization and disjoint.
Total specialization rule and the disjoint. Rule. That's right. So under the completeness constraint, it's following the total specialization rule represented by these double lines. Double line thakle, it's always total specialization rule. And under the disjointness constraint, it's following the disjoint rule represented by the D inside the circle. Right. Now, how do we map it into a relational schema design? First of all, employee ke as it is map korbo. So far, যেভাবে map করে এসেছি, employee number is the primary key, and the rest of the attributes are regular attributes. So simply employee name, employee address, the employee date hired, and employee type. ঠিক আছে? So far যেভাবে করেছি, just simply regular entity, regular relation. Okay. Now these are the tricky parts. Why? Because as you can see, the subtypes they don't have their own primary keys. Why is that? Why doesn't hourly employee, salaried employee, consultant? Why do they not have their own primary keys? Inherit korbe. That's right. By the property of attribute inheritance in supertype subtype relationships, hourly employee, salaried employees, consultant will inherit all of the attributes of the employee supertype entity. Hence, primary key shoho actually inherit code. So how do we translate that into our relational schema design? What we do is, for each one of these subtypes, we create new relations. We put the attributes of the subtypes into those relations, and the primary key of the subtypes will also be referencing the primary key of the supertype. So see here, employee is the relation that we created for the supertype. Supertype এর জন্য যে রিলেশনটা ক্রিয়েট করছি, that's employee. Subtype এর জন্য hourly employee subtype এর জন্য যে রিলেশন ক্রিয়েট করছি, that's the hourly underscore employee here. Notice that it has a primary key because in relational data structure, every single relation must have a primary. So H employee number is the primary key of our hourly employee relation. And this one is referencing the employee number, primary key of the employee relation. Why is it referencing that? Because of attribute inheritance. Remember that it inherits the primary key as well. So by that we know that it can reference the employee number, primary key of the employee relation as well. So since hourly employee is a subtype of the employee supertype, hourly employee primary key ta ki hobe? Simply we will bring in the primary key of the employee relation. Employee relation এর primary key কে এখানে নিয়ে আসবো, and this one, this employee number primary key will be here in hourly employee as a primary key, as well as the foreign key for hourly employee referencing the employee number, primary key of the employee relation. All right. Similarly for the other relations as well. Baki je duto relation create korechi for the other two subtypes. Consultant relation created for the consultant subtype. What will we do there? Once again, supertype থেকে primary key নিয়ে আসবো consultant relation. And consultant relation এর primary key হবে গিয়ে the same primary key that we brought in from the employee supertype. However, it's also the foreign key at the same time, referencing the employee number, primary key of the employee relation. Same goes for salaried employee. Employee number, which is the primary key of the employee relation, supertype. Supertype এর primary key কে salaried employee মধ্যে নিয়ে আসবো as a primary key, but at the same time it's also the foreign key referencing the employee number, primary key of the employee relation. Why do we need to maintain these references? এই reference গুলো কেন maintain করা লাগছে? To represent the fact that employee number এর origin কিন্তু employee তে. To represent the fact that employee number originally belongs to the employee relation, is the primary key originally of the employee relation. And these relations, while employee number is also the primary key of these relations, but they are referencing the employee number, primary key of the employee relation. So origin হচ্ছে গিয়ে এখানে. So that we know the hierarchy. Hierarchy টা বোঝার জন্য. Hierarchy তে এই employee number টা উপরে. So we know that employee is at the top. And then these ones, while they are primary keys of each one of these relations respectively, sure, but they are also referencing the original employee number, primary key of the employee relation. Also notice that প্রত্যেকটা subtype এর জন্য primary key সাথে এই যে তোমার subtype discriminator-টা add করে দেওয়া হচ্ছে. We need to do that always, right? For example, hourly employee, subtype discriminator H. Add H to hourly employee. Consultant, subtype discriminator C. Add C to the primary key employee. Salaried employee, subtype discriminator S. Add S to the primary key employee number. Just to be able to differentiate. Yes, just differentiate করতে পারার জন্য, as simple as that. Not something mandatory, all right? What's mandatory is that you create new relations, put the primary key of the relation for the supertype into these new relations as well as primary keys, and at the same time maintain the referential integrity, represent the fact that all of these three are referencing the original employee number, primary key of the employee relation. That's all. Any questions so far regarding the entire lecture?
No, miss.
Okay, cool. Let's take a break then. Let's take a 10-minute break and we'll come back and join using the